A comeback. My late blooming success in the world of Greek mythology. Chapter 1. Excruciating pain. It felt as if his soul was being violently crammed into an overly cramped mold. Every bone, every nerve, screamed in protest. Li Yan's consciousness was thus brutally dragged back to reality from endless sinking and darkness. He tried to struggle, but tragically found his limbs were weak and limp. Even the simplest act of opening his eyes exhausted all the strength he currently possessed. What met his eyes was a towering, golden dome. Upon the dome were carved intricate patterns beyond mortal imagination. Each line flowed with majesty and divinity, radiating a splendor too intense to look upon directly. This was not the mortal world. Li Yan's heart instantly plummeted. He clearly remembered that he had merely been staying up late in his rented room, flipping through a hardcover pirated book he had picked up from a street stall, the Codex of Olympus. It was called pirated because the copyright page was blank. It was called hardcover because the printing was exceptionally exquisite, and the pages seemed imbued with the unique weight and antiquity of the mythical age. Just as he was immersed in the loves and hatreds of the gods, the pages suddenly emitted a blinding golden light that instantly swallowed him whole. In the final moment the golden light consumed him, Li Yan seemed to hear a sigh echoing across billions of years, filled with exhaustion and finality, along with the unwilling lamentations of countless dying deities. The sound did not travel through the air, it exploded directly in the deepest part of his soul, like the final testament of a civilization. And now, he had become an infant. A fragile baby, held in someone's arms, crying for milk, and unable to control his own body. The woman holding him was breathtakingly beautiful, so noble she seemed like the center of the entire universe. Her eyes seemed to hold brilliant stars and the vast Milky Way. A single glance was enough to make everything in the world fall before her. Yet, these eyes, which should have been the most beautiful in the world, were currently brimming with undisguised, bone-chilling loathing and fury. No, it wasn't just anger. It was a more complex emotion, mixed with monstrous jealousy and the profound disappointment of shattered dreams. A strange connection originating from the depths of his bloodline allowed Li Yan to instantly know her identity. Hera. Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage and childbirth. Then, who was he? The instant this thought arose, a searing, burning pain that threatened to reduce his soul to ash erupted from the deepest part of his consciousness. Li Yan felt his consciousness instantly pulled into a vast and boundless mental space. A copy of the Codex of Olympus, identical to the one he had seen before his transmigration, quietly floated in the center of his soul, turning its pages slowly without a breeze. The book had no physical form, it was more like a torrent of information forcibly branded onto the deepest part of his soul. It was divided into 2 volumes. The first volume was titled, The Mythos. It densely recorded the Greek myths he knew, and even more detailed and secret information than he was aware of. From the birth of chaos, to the golden age of the Titans, and then to the rise and glory of the Olympian gods. The duties, powers, character flaws, and relationships of all deities, the destined paths of all heroes, the strengths and weaknesses of all monsters, every secret in this world seemed to be recorded within. This was the entirety of the book he had before transmigrating, and now it had become his sole, greatest reliance in this world of myth. The second volume, however, was titled, The Book of Destiny. It was currently blank, as if quietly waiting for a scribe to write a brand new chapter of history. Li Yan endured the soul-shredding agony, urgently focused his thoughts on the mythos, and frantically searched for his own identity. His mind locked onto the key phrase, son of Hera, and among the vast pantheon, he found his own entry. Lines of cold text, like a decree of fate, clearly appeared before his eyes. Divine name, Hephaestus. Domain, god of fire, forge, and craftsman. Lineage, sole son of Hera. Birth context, born from Hera alone, in a fit of extreme jealousy and pride, after Zeus gave birth to the goddess of wisdom, Athena, from his head. Hera sought to prove that she, too, possessed supreme divine power and could create life without union. This was the queen's challenge to the king's authority. Destiny trajectory. His mother, Hera, intended to give birth to a perfect, powerful offspring comparable to Athena, thereby displaying her glory. However, Hephaestus was born lame and ugly. Hera's pride transformed into boundless fury and shame, seeing him as a blemish on her authority and a symbol of failure. In her rage, she threw him from the peak of Mount Olympus, sending him plunging into the endless mortal sea. So, that was it. Li Yan, or rather, Hephaestus's, heart sank completely into a cold abyss. He wasn't just an abandoned child. He was a failed product. He was a failed creation, marked by shame, resulting from Queen Hera's power struggle with her husband, Zeus. His very existence served as a constant reminder to Hera that she had lost. Lost utterly and completely. No wonder the disgust in her eyes was so profound. No wonder her anger was mixed with resentment and jealousy. Because he should have been her glory, the perfect weapon to retaliate against Zeus's arrogant feat of independently giving birth to Athena. Instead, he turned out to be a cripple and an eyesore. What incredible irony and humiliation this was for the Olympian gods, who valued glory and perfection above all, especially for Queen Hera. This is my answer, my glory meant to strike back at Zeus. Hera's voice was devoid of emotion, sounding more like she was talking to herself, every word laced with venom. Zeus birthed the flawless goddess of wisdom and war from his arrogant head. And I, the mistress of marriage and childbirth, have given birth to such a defect. Her words were full of malice, as if she were looking not at her child, but at an enemy who had brought her shame. Dispose of him. Hera finally made her decision, her voice stripped of hesitation, leaving only pure ruthlessness and finality. The glory of Olympus cannot tolerate such a stain. She lifted Hephaestus high, holding him like a piece of disgusting garbage that needed to be discarded immediately. The fierce high-altitude wind blew in, carrying a bone-piercing chill that made Hephaestus's fragile infant body tremble uncontrollably. The surrounding deities cast glances that were either amused, indifferent, or gloating. Apollo, the god of light, stood far off, holding his lyre. His peerlessly handsome face wore a philosophical scrutiny, as if observing an interesting event concerning perfection and flaw. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, elegantly covered her mouth and nose with her sleeve. She refused to even look directly at the ugly infant, merely frowning slightly as she whispered to Ares, the god of war, beside her, "What a pity." Hera's effort seems to have yielded the worst possible result. Ares, the god of war who worshipped violence and strength, made no effort to hide his mockery, his gaze seeming to say, "Look at that. Is this my ridiculous new half-brother? A born failure." Even Athena, renowned for her wisdom, merely stood calmly to the side, her gray eyes rational and indifferent, seemingly evaluating the minor impact this event would have on the balance of power on Olympus, rather than being motivated by any sibling affection. At this moment, Hephaestus understood to his core. This was Olympus. Beneath the divine splendor lay ultimate indifference, eternal self-interest, and a naked game of power. Crying and begging were useless against these iron-hearted deities, it would only invite greater contempt and make them want to dispose of this source of noise faster. He had to save himself. In the second before he was thrown into the abyss, he had to prove that he was not useless trash. He had to prove his worth. An adult soul, trapped within a broken infant's body, erupted with the most powerful will to survive it had ever known. Hephaestus did not cry or wail. He endured the intense physical pain and his congenital defects, channeling all his mental strength to awaken the innate, primal divine power belonging to the god of craftsmen. It was the most ancient talent inscribed in his bloodline, the authority governing fire, metal, and creation. His gaze locked fiercely onto the edge of the armrest of Queen Hera's golden throne. There, an inconspicuous metal lump remained, a small excess from the original casting. That was it. An invisible yet fiercely burning wave of will suddenly emanated from Hephaestus's small body. To the astonishment of all the gods, a spectacle none had foreseen, that unremarkable metal scrap suddenly melted into liquid air. It transformed into a single, golden, scalding drop of liquid, silently detaching itself from the throne. It did not fall, instead, defying all logic, it hovered in the air. In the next second, the metallic liquid began to stretch, twist, deform, and reconstruct at a speed visible to the naked eye. The entire process involved no furnace fire, no striking hammer, it was pure intent and divine power performing an unbelievable act of creation out of thin air. Veins bulged on Hephaestus's forehead, and his tiny body shook violently from the severe overdraft of divine power. This body was still too weak. But he had to succeed. In the span of a single breath, the creation was complete. A small metal rose, exquisite to the extreme and seemingly containing all the craft mysteries of the cosmos, floated quietly in midair. Each of its petals was as thin as a cicada's wing, with natural veins clearly visible, as if mapping the pulse of life. Its stamens were layered, delicate and seemingly ready to drip, gently unfurling in the temple's divine light. This was no longer an inanimate object, it was a living work of art, imbued with a soul. Hephaestus used his last ounce of strength, controlling the small metal rose with his mind, guiding it slowly yet with absolute certainty toward Queen Hera, who still held him aloft. The entire Olympian temple fell into a deathly silence. The amusement and indifference vanished from the faces of all the gods, including the notoriously proud Apollo and Athena, replaced by undisguised, genuine shock. What level of talent was this? Innate, requiring no instruction, capable of turning decay into wonder with a mere wave of the hand. Apollo, the god of light, abruptly ceased plucking the strings of the lyre in his hand. The philosophical scrutiny had vanished entirely from his handsome face, replaced by the awe and fervor of an artist witnessing a miracle. As a patron of art and beauty, he understood the significance of this rose better than anyone. It represented an uncompromising talent, born standing at the absolute pinnacle of craftsmanship. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, widened her enchanting eyes. She had initially been filled with contempt and disgust for the ugly infant, but now, her attention was completely captivated by the metal rose. She saw ultimate beauty, a structural perfection born of the purest skill, untainted by any hint of sensuality. This gave her an absurd, contradictory feeling. The source of ugliness had birthed a creation of absolute beauty. The mockery froze on the face of Ares, the god of war. He didn't understand art, but he understood power. What if this power of creation were applied to forging weapons? What terrifying outcome would that produce? For the first time, a hint of solemnity entered his eyes regarding this useless younger brother. Standing nearby, the wise and indifferent gray eyes of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, rippled with intense emotion for the very first time. As a goddess who also presided over skill and creation, she knew the terrifying level of control and talent required to complete such a feat. She herself required tools, time, and careful planning. Yet this newborn infant, disgraced by the queen, had accomplished a miracle with a mere gesture, a feat she could not easily replicate. This was an overwhelming superiority stemming from his primal essence and divine rank. For the first time, her pride was challenged by the very corner she most despised. Hera stretched out her hand, almost subconsciously, and caught the metal rose that floated before her. The cold metal transmitted a warm sensation, and the flawlessly perfect form of the creation caused the queen, who was accustomed to all the world's rarest treasures, to momentarily lose her composure. She slowly lowered her head, looking once more at the infant in her arms. On that still ugly face, a pair of deep, resilient eyes gazed calmly back at her. There was no pleading, no crying, only a silent demonstration that shook the gods to their core. For the first time, Hera's heart was violently shaken. Her disgust for the child still lingered. But within that disgust, an element she hadn't yet recognized was added: astonishment and confusion. Just then, a voice filled with supreme majesty and absolute oppression, like rolling thunder, arrived from outside the temple, shaking the entire holy mountain. Stop, Hera! The gods swiftly turned and bowed in salute. Zeus, the king of gods, had arrived. His tall, imposing figure appeared at the temple entrance, his gaze sweeping the hall like lightning before finally settling on Hera and the infant in her arms. There was no trace of paternal warmth in his eyes, instead, he looked as if he were scrutinizing a newly unearthed artifact of undetermined value. A defective product. Zeus's voice was cold and authoritative, instantly defining Hephaestus the moment he spoke. But, his tone shifted, his sharp gaze fixing on the exquisitely crafted metal rose in Hera's hand, a flicker of imperceptible shrewdness in his eyes. He might be of some use. Zeus knew better than anyone that although the Titanomachy was over, the ancient deities imprisoned in the abyss of Tartarus remained a sword hanging over his throne. He required stronger weapons and more durable divine artifacts to consolidate his hard-won rule. And the talent displayed by this son, whom Hera regarded as a failure, was exactly what he coveted. He didn't need a perfect son to share his glory, but he needed a perfect craftsman to forge his instruments of power. He may remain on Olympus. Zeus delivered his final verdict. His words were the only law in this place. However, his majestic gaze swept over Hephaestus, carrying an undeniable command and warning. His forge must be far from the temples of the gods, built on the very edge of Mount Olympus. Without my direct summons, he is forbidden from stepping even a single pace into the center of power. This was both a concession and an exile. Hephaestus survived. He did not plummet into the deep sea, as fate's script had intended. Instead, in an alternate form of banishment, he was fixed upon the summit of this glorious yet cold holy mountain. As the surrounding tension dissipated, Hephaestus once again submerged his weary consciousness deep into his soul. He saw that the long blank scroll of destiny was now emitting its first brilliant golden light. A line of his own, brand new myth, was slowly appearing, word by word. Zeus's judgment, like an invisible giant hammer, set the tone for Hephaestus's destiny on Olympus. Exile. Even at the peak of the holy mountain, this was a form of exile. He was carefully carried away from the god-king's main hall, a symbol of power and glory, by two low-ranking nymph goddesses, as if he were a fragile treasure. They took him to an isolated palace on the easternmost edge of Mount Olympus, suspended above a sea of clouds. This was the workshop bestowed upon him by the god King Zeus. The palace was indeed magnificent. It was entirely carved from pure white moonlight rock, with pillars inlaid with stars from the night sky, emitting a soft and eternal glow. The ground was as smooth as a mirror, reflecting the flowing clouds in the sky. It was spotless here, quiet enough to hear one's own heartbeat. However, for a god of craftsmanship, this was the most magnificent cage. Hephaestus was placed in an incredibly soft cradle woven from clouds. After respectfully bowing, the nymphs quietly retreated, leaving him alone to face this empty, silent, yet perfectly perfect palace. There was no gratitude in his heart, only a cold silence. Just then, an indescribable heat and hunger erupted from the deepest parts of his soul and body. This was the after effect of overdrawing his divine power while creating the metal rose. This was not gentle nourishment, but a violent, destructive remolding. His bones creaked, being stretched and reshaped at a speed incomprehensible to mortals. His internal organs were tempered by divine fire, letting out cries of unbearable strain, only to be repaired by a more powerful life force in the next second. When Hephaestus opened his eyes again, he was no longer a helpless infant. He had transformed into the appearance of a child of about 5 or 6 years old. Aside from his naturally deformed clubfoot, his physique was no different from that of a normal child. His appearance also solidified with his growth. He did not inherit Hera's nobility, nor did he possess Zeus's majesty. Among the handsome Olympian deities, his appearance could only be described as unremarkable, and even a little gloomy due to a deep, age-inappropriate seriousness always locked between his brows. Most importantly, his eyes. Those eyes were as black as the deepest night sky, containing no childlike innocence, only the calm and resilience of someone who saw through everything. The first burst of divine power actually accelerated my growth directly. Hephaestus looked down at his tender yet powerful hands, understanding dawning in his heart. This was a good thing. Being a child would give him more freedom of movement and allow the arrogant gods to relax their guard. He struggled to climb out of the cloud cradle, barefoot and limping across the cold, smooth floor. This is my new beginning. He surveyed his surroundings. Here, there was the purest light, the cleanest air, the most magnificent building materials. But there was not a handful of dirt to feel the pulse of the earth. Not a single cluster of mortal fire to ignite the flames of creation. And certainly not a single rough, unrefined ore containing infinite possibilities. Everything here was finished, perfect, sacred. Yet forging was precisely an art that turned decay into wonder, creating perfection from imperfection. Zeus's intention was clear. He saw Hephaestus's demonstrated talent and kept him as an unpolished tool. But before he needed to use this tool, he would never allow it to have the potential to harm him or challenge the existing order. Therefore, he gave Hephaestus the status of a divine son, but stripped him of all the foundations essential to his existence as a god of craftsmanship. Hephaestus understood that by staying here, he would forever be a caged genius, waiting to be exploited. His divine power and his skills would gradually fall into disuse due to lack of application. Does he want to turn me into a harmless decorative craftsman who only makes exquisite trinkets? A deep, cold light flashed in Hephaestus's eyes. He would never accept such a fate. He calmed his mind once more, his consciousness delving into the Olympus Codex, deep within his soul. Since this magnificent cage could not provide him with power, he had to find true fertile ground for himself. He focused his thoughts on the Mythology scroll, frantically searching for terms related to fire, forging, and heart of the earth. A torrent of information flashed through his consciousness. Finally, his gaze settled on a volcano in the mortal world. Place name: Mount Etna. Location: Mortal Realm, Sicily. Description: the prison of Typhon, the hundred-headed giant son of the Earth Mother Gaia. Typhon's rage and divine power erupt from the depths of the earth, creating this eternal furnace of fire. This place is the source of fire, the vein of metal, and the future divine domain and destined workshop of Hephaestus, the god of craftsmen. Note: the Cyclops race also resides on this mountain. They are natural mastersmiths who once forged thunderbolts for the god King Zeus. This is it. This was where he should be. Hephaestus's heart pounded violently, a deep-seated longing and resonance for his destined place. Mount Olympus was the palace of the gods, but Mount Etna was Hephaestus's kingdom. However, he couldn't just leave like this. A young divine son, a cripple, alone in a perilous mythical world, would likely become a snack for some powerful beast before even finding Mount Etna. He had already changed his own destiny. He couldn't guarantee that he would encounter the sea goddess Thetis as recorded in the myths. Leaving is necessary, but before I leave, I must leverage my identity on Olympus to gain the greatest resources and advantages for myself. He forced himself to think more deeply. Mount Olympus was the pinnacle of power and the source of information in this world. Although the gods were arrogant and aloof, it was precisely because of this that invisible barriers existed between them. Hephaestus's consciousness once again delved into the Mythology scroll. This time, he wasn't looking for his own destiny, but rather, from a god's eye view, surveying the entire Olympian network of divine relationships. He quickly discovered an interesting phenomenon: information barriers. God King Zeus commanded the skies, his authority and majesty awe-inspiring, but he did not have detailed knowledge of how many new sea monsters inhabited Poseidon's kingdom beneath the deep sea. Apollo, the god of light, presided over art and prophecy, yet most of his oracles were vague, and he was even less clear about the true structure of Hades, gloomy realm and the laws governing the movement of souls. Queen Hera, jealous and fickle, cared about her marriage and glory, showing no interest in which meaningless wars Ares had stirred up among mortals. Each god had their own duties, and divine power, like high walls, confined their vision and information to their own domains. They were like islands of information. Hephaestus, however, with the Olympus Codex in hand, became the only map opener with a complete map. He knew the location of all islands, and the secrets of all islands. This was his greatest advantage. I need a ferryman who can freely navigate between these islands of information. In Hephaestus's mind, the name of a deity gradually became clear. There was one god who was an exception. He was not the most powerful, nor the most revered, but he was the most unique and indispensable. His thoughts precisely locked onto that name in the Mythology scroll. Divine name: Hermes. Divine functions: messenger of the gods, god of commerce, travelers, thievery, and animal husbandry, guide of souls of the dead. Lineage: son of god King Zeus and Maya. Characteristics: travels between the divine realm, human realm, and underworld. He is the conveyor of divine will, a hub of information, and a boundary crosser of rules. Naturally cunning, pragmatic, and extremely intelligent. It's him. Hephaestus's pupils suddenly constricted, his heart uncontrollably accelerating. This was the most perfect partner, tailor-made for him. He needed Hermes's guidance to leave Olympus. He needed Hermes's information to understand the secrets of the three realms. In the future, he would need Hermes, the god of commerce, for channels to sell the divine artifacts he forged throughout the three realms. Securing Hermes would be equivalent to possessing a pair of eyes that could survey the entire mythical world, and a pair of arms that could reach any corner. Its strategic value even far surpassed forming an alliance with a powerful chief god. It's decided. Before he accumulated strength and went to Mount Etna, he must first develop this future divine messenger into his first and most crucial ally. However, a key question like ice water, extinguished the fervor in his heart. Had Hermes been born yet? According to the Mythology scroll, Hermes' mother, Maia, was a nymph who lived in seclusion in a cave on Mount Cylon in Arcadia. Hermes, on the very day of his birth, stole Apollo's divine cattle, demonstrating astonishing talent and cunning. But the question was, what day was today? The Mythology scroll recorded mythical events that had already happened or were destined to happen. It was more like a compilation of chronicles than a real-time updated calendar. Ever since Hephaestus transmigrated and changed his fate of being thrown off the mountain, the timeline of this world had shown its first deviation. He couldn't determine whether, at this current point in time, Zeus had already slipped away to Mount Cylon and fathered the future divine messenger with Maia. If Hermes had already been born and, like in the myths, had become famous due to the cattle-stealing incident, then he could naturally follow the clues. But what if he hadn't been born yet? Or, what if he had been born, but for some reason, hadn't caused any major stir yet, and was still living in obscurity with his mother in that secluded cave? In such a vast world, where would a crippled child, confined to the peak of Mount Olympus, go to find him? Hephaestus's brow furrowed deeply for the first time. How could he, on this information-isolated holy mountain, confirm the birth or non-birth of a future, divine messenger? Hephaestus's gaze pierced through the walls of the magnificent palace, as if seeing the distant, proud, and glorious temple of light on the horizon. He needed a breakthrough. A breakthrough that could reconnect his stagnant pool with the surging rivers of the outside world. And Apollo, who governed art, light, and prophecy, was undoubtedly the best choice. This deity possessed the pride of the god-king's bloodline, the extreme sensitivity of an artist, and an almost obsessive pursuit of perfection and order. He was like an eternally burning sun, radiating brilliance, but because of this, he could not tolerate any light or sound in the world that he could not understand or control. This was the weakness Hephaestus could exploit. Most importantly, according to the code, the first major event after Hermes' birth was closely related to Apollo. Since you pride yourself on classical art, I will use art from the future, which you absolutely cannot comprehend, as my bait. A deep smile, utterly unsuited to his childlike appearance, curved Hephaestus's lips. He intended to create electronic music, a unique form of music yet to exist in this world. The first step in the forging plan was the selection of materials, as their quality determined the upper limit of his creation. This theory came from his instinctive judgment of his abilities. The metal rose he created before had no special abilities, so this wasn't a concern, but now it was different. He limped through the palace, searching. Soon, his gaze was drawn to a forgotten, fist-sized black crystal in the corner of the fireplace. He mentally flipped through the Olympus code and compared it to the material before him. Material: lightning stone. Description: divine wood struck by a trace of lightning power inadvertently leaked by god King Zeus, carbonized and crystallized under extreme high temperature and divine power. It contains violent energy and the laws of rhythm. Perhaps it can be used as a CPU, Hephaestus mused silently. Next, he walked towards the palace's pillars, where countless tiny star decorations were embedded. Material: stardust. Description: the remnants after stars fall, containing the laws of information transmission from the starry sky. This can be used as circuitry. Finally, he looked at the floor, which was as smooth as a mirror. Material: moonlight rock. Description: unique to Mount Olympus, stable and pure in nature, capable of supporting and isolating different divine powers to prevent conflict. A good substrate. Hephaestus extended his tender little hand, and a faint but pure golden divine flame ignited at his fingertips. He first carefully peeled off a small, core piece from the lightning stone, then scraped off enough stardust powder, and also painstakingly chipped off a piece of the moonlight rock floor beneath his feet. This process was extremely taxing on his mind and divine power. It took him a full day and night to gather all the materials. He sat cross-legged, the three divine materials suspended in his palm. He closed his eyes, and in his mind, he envisioned the unique timbres and textures, non-existent in nature, created by synthesizers, samplers, computer software, and other electronic devices, which he had heard through headphones before his transmigration. What he was forging was not a musical instrument, but a sound emitter, a miracle that could play the first electronic music in this mythical world. Buzz. The light in his palm grew brighter and brighter. With the heart of lightning as the core, the stardust powder, as if programmed, rapidly constructed the most precise, miniature, integrated circuit-like structure from Hephaestus's mind onto the substrate formed by the molten moonlight rock. Fine beads of sweat appeared on Hephaestus's forehead, and his small face was somewhat pale from the intense consumption of divine power. He could clearly feel that the primordial divine flame within him was being consumed at an astonishing rate, and in this palace, isolated from the earth, it received no replenishment whatsoever. But the light in his eyes grew even brighter, like a fiercely burning flame in the dark night. Finally, the light dissipated. A thumb-sized creation, entirely composed of moonlight crystal and shaped like a pick, quietly floated in his palm. Inside it, intricate golden circuits, like the night view of a futuristic city, were formed from brilliant stardust, all converging at the small, faintly glowing black chip in the very center. This was the bait he had meticulously prepared for Apollo. Electronic heart. Hephaestus extended his hand, imbuing it with a unique effect. Fugue pulse. Effect. When divine power is injected, it emits unique sounds generated by electronic components. The rhythm and timbre change according to the user's will. Hephaestus injected a trace of his divine power into it, powering it on. The next second, a stable, repetitive, and driving beat, a constantly changing and somewhat abstract timbre, quietly emanated from the electronic heart. It lacked the melody and harmony of traditional music, instead filled with a grand, profound, and psychedelic sense of space. After a simple test of his creation, Hephaestus immediately cut off the divine power supply and carefully assessed his condition. Judging by the dimness of the flame within me, I can complete at most 3 to 4 more forgings, and they must be these miniature creations. Anything slightly larger or more complex would probably drain me in one go. Moreover, I've only forged twice, so I can't quantify it yet, only estimate. It seems that going to Mount Etna is imperative. At this moment, in his own temple of light, Apollo was lazily reclining on his throne. He casually plucked the strings of the world-famous golden lyre in his arms. The music was melodious, like sounds from heaven. Yet, Apollo's brow was slightly furrowed. He always felt that his music seemed to be missing something. Just then, a pulse he had never heard before, indescribable in words, silently penetrated deep into his divine soul. It wasn't just a sound, but carried an irresistible sense of rhythm and an ethereal sense of space. Apollo's plucking motion suddenly stiffened. The golden lyre in his arms even let out a faint, confused hum, as if encountering something it couldn't comprehend. What is this? Apollo suddenly sat upright, the lazy expression on his face vanishing without a trace, replaced by unprecedented shock and disbelief. On Olympus, on this sacred mountain where he presided over music and art, there appeared a sound that he could not understand, one that even surpassed his cognition. A sound that did not originate from any known instrument, yet clearly existed at the level of laws. This was impossible. This was a provocation to his authority. An insult to him as the god of art. Apollo's pride was completely ignited at this moment. He rose abruptly, his golden eyes flickering with a desire for inquiry and conquest. He must find the source of this sound. He must figure out what this thing truly was. He closed his eyes, carefully sensing the origin of that electronic pulse. It was intermittent, with a psychedelic sense of detachment, continuously teasing his curiosity and desire for exploration as the god of music. Finally, he locked onto that direction. To the east of the sacred mountain, that lonely palace belonging to his lame younger brother. A trace of surprise and disdain flashed in Apollo's eyes. That ugly, failed product, regarded as a disgrace by the Queen of Heaven. How could he create something so bizarre yet perfect? Filled with doubt and arrogance, Apollo transformed into a golden light, instantly crossing the vast distance and appearing before the gates of Hephaestus's palace. He didn't even bother to knock, pushing the door open directly. He saw the lame child sitting on the cold floor, playing with a small object in his hand, its interior shimmering with wondrous light paths. And the source of that electronic pulse that unsettled him, making even his proud lyre skills seem primitive, was precisely that small creation. What is that in your hand? Apollo's voice carried an undeniable authority, his gaze fixed on the electronic heart in Hephaestus's hand, his eyes filled with the shock and fervor of an artist encountering a new art form. Hephaestus slowly raised his head, feigning a frightened, timid expression. He hid the electronic heart behind him and quietly replied, It's a little trinket I made. Give it to me. Apollo commanded impolitely, eager to get his hands on this divine object for study. Hephaestus, however, shook his head, his tender face etched with stubbornness. Apollo's brow furrowed deeper. He, the majestic god of light, was being refused by a child. But he was so itching to get his hands on that creation that he patiently asked in what he thought was a gentle tone, how about a trade? Tell me your wish, and as long as I can fulfill it, this thing is mine. The fish had taken the bait. Hephaestus sneered inwardly, but on his face, he showed an expression full of curiosity and longing for the outside world. In an innocent tone, he posed the question he had already prepared. Respected god of light, I am imprisoned here and have never seen the scenery outside of Olympus. I always have some strange and vivid dreams. I dreamed that in a cave on Mount Cylon in the mortal realm, a beautiful nymph gave birth to a younger brother who could speak eloquently and was as fast as the wind from birth. I envy him so much, being able to run freely. As Hephaestus spoke, he lowered his head to look at his deformed legs, a timely hint of sadness in his eyes. He looked up, gazing at Apollo with hopeful eyes. Great god Apollo, you wield prophecy and perceive all things in the world. Can you tell me, is my dream true? Is there really such a newborn deity? This question perfectly scratched Apollo's itch. It satisfied his vanity as the god of prophecy, and seemed so harmless, merely the fantasy and yearning for freedom of a confined child. However, upon hearing the words, Mount Cylon, and fast as the wind, Apollo's expression instantly changed. His handsome face, slightly distorted by anger, he gritted his teeth and said, Dream. HMPH. That's no dream. That fooled thief. That cunning liar. Apollo's rage erupted like a volcano. Just a few days ago, that son born to Zeus and Maia in the cave on Mount Cylon, that scoundrel named Hermes. On his first day of birth, he came and stole 50 of my divine cattle. And he used footprints to confuse my tracking. If I hadn't used my prophetic divine power, I would have almost been fooled by that newborn babe. The more Apollo spoke, the angrier he became, completely oblivious to the glint of successful scheming that flashed in the eyes of the innocent child before him. Hermes had already been born. And, due to the cattle theft incident, he was already on Apollo's radar. All key information was now in hand. Hephaestus's objective was perfectly achieved. He gently pushed the electronic heart, and the marvelous creation transformed into a streak of light, flying into Apollo's hand. Thank you, great deity. Hephaestus bowed deeply, concealing the knowing glint in his eyes. Now, I know my dream is not a solitary fantasy. Apollo held the cold, precise electronic heart, which contained new laws, and the anger in his heart was somewhat soothed by this unprecedented work of art. He looked at his ugly yet intelligent younger brother, and for the first time, his gaze held less disdain and more complex scrutiny. He snorted, transformed into a golden light, and vanished, eager to study this new instrument. Meanwhile, Hephaestus slowly straightened up, looking towards the mortal realm. His gaze seemed to penetrate the endless sea of clouds, precisely locking onto that peak named Cylon. Next target, Hermes. After receiving intelligence from Apollo that Hermes had already been born, a grand scheme quietly began to unfold in Hephaestus's mind. He didn't choose to passively wait for this future divine messenger to make a name for himself before trying to approach him. Nor was he foolish enough to actively curry favor with the cunning and fickle new god. Asymmetrical information is the most powerful weapon in this world. Hephaestus decided to use his unique informational advantage and unparalleled forging ability in the divine realm to set up a ghost commission that only Hermes could understand and would be willing to accept. First, he needed a sufficiently exquisite reward. The value of this reward could not be too astonishing, so as not to arouse Zeus's or other main gods' unnecessary vigilance and covetousness. But it also had to possess a fatal, irresistible attraction for that specific god. Hephaestus's gaze fell on the edge of his cloud cradle. There, an inconspicuous decorative feather, carved from moonlight rock, was embedded. In the eyes of the gods, this wasn't even a material, it was just a useless embellishment by a child's bed. But in Hephaestus's eyes, this was the perfect canvas. He extended his small hand, and that wisp of golden primordial divine fire ignited again at his fingertips. The flames enveloped the feather, making no violent sound, but silently melting it into a liquid flowing with moonlight. He spent the entire night in secret forging. There was no hammering, no shaping, it was purely by will, pouring his understanding of wind and speed into it. When the faint glow of dawn entered the palace, a brand new creation lay quietly in his palm. At this point, I hope readers will remember our domain for reading novels, 101kanshu.com, for a super smooth experience. It was a brooch about half the size of a palm. The brooch was entirely streamlined in the shape of a wing, as if it would take flight with the wind the next second, and upon it, with the stardust he had collected, miniature wind runes, incomprehensible to mortals, were intricately carved. Hephaestus injected a trace of divine power into it, giving this work the meaning of its birth. An invisible decree, a judgment from a god, was deeply imprinted in the core of this brooch. Fugue of the breeze. Effect. When the wearer walks or runs, all forms of resistance experienced by their feet will be negligible, and their body will be light, like a flying swallow. Hephaestus named this work Feather of Swiftness. For the king of gods, Zeus, this might just be an exquisite trinket. For Ares, the god of war, it was too fragile to withstand a single blow. But for the future, divine messenger, and god of thieves, this would be the first perfect, early divine artifact, perfectly aligned with his core authority, on his path to godhood. Hephaestus smiled with satisfaction, placing the brooch on his workbench, waiting for another person to enter the game. He checked his status again. I probably only have one forge flame left, but even without the flame's restriction, I can't dismantle this entire palace just for forging. The next day, the nymph goddess Oenone, who usually delivered divine nectar to him, arrived as scheduled. Oenone was a simple-minded low-ranking goddess. She held reverence for the higher gods of Olympus but felt a natural sympathy for Hephaestus, her ostracized young master. Hephaestus didn't immediately produce the brooch. Instead, he feigned the appearance of a tech geek, agonizing over a technical problem. He sat by a pile of discarded metal materials, his brows furrowed, constantly gesticulating and muttering to himself. It wasn't until Oenone had set down the food and was about to leave that he seemed to suddenly awaken. He limped quickly to her, handed her the Feather of Swiftness, and said in a childlike, somewhat insistent and obstinate tone. Oenone, I'm researching a metal that can perfectly embody the concept of divine speed, but my inspiration has run dry. He deliberately paused, tilting his head, feigning an effort to recall. I heard, in the distant mortal realm, there's a mountain called Scyllin, and in the mountain, there's a cave that never sees sunlight year-round. Legend has it that the oldest and swiftest wind in this world resides in that cave. I need a wisp of that wind for my research sample. Oenone listened, her face full of confusion. A god born with a limp, yet madly pursuing speed. And wanting to go to a remote mortal cave to capture an ethereal wind. This was the most absurd and impractical idea she had ever heard. Hephaestus keenly caught the doubt and incomprehension in her eyes, which was exactly the effect he wanted. He unceremoniously placed the brooch in Oenone's hand and continued in a more innocent, even slightly self-deprecating tone. I know, it's difficult, even ridiculous. But if, and I mean if, someone can bring me that wind, this Feather of Swiftness will be his reward. Can you ask around when you're chatting with your sisters? Just say it's my lame craftsman's impractical little dream. He deliberately emphasized the words lame craftsman and impractical dream. He successfully portrayed himself as a harmless, pitiable child, immersed in his own fantasy world, trying to compensate for his physical disability with his craftsmanship. This completely dispelled the last trace of doubt in Oenone's mind. She looked at this young master, ostracized by the gods, whose dim eyes now burned with a persistent flame for his dream. A feeling of sympathy and pity arose spontaneously. She nodded solemnly, carefully put away the exquisitely beautiful brooch, and firmly remembered this matter as a strange yet sacred task that needed to be completed diligently. Oenone faithfully carried out the order she had promised. While collecting nectar for the gods, she chatted about this strange commission with her familiar flower fairy, Flora. While washing the gods, clothed by the sacred spring, she told this story to Climene, the daughter of the river god. Even on one accidental occasion, she mentioned this lame craftsman's dream to a mortal centaur messenger who was delivering messages to Apollo's temple. Soon, a peculiar rumor, like a dandelion seed, quietly spread through the lower and middle non-core circles of Mount Olympus. Hey, have you heard? The lame son of the Queen of Heaven actually offered a divine artifact as a reward, just to get a wisp of wind. What kind of wind is so valuable? They say it's wind blowing out of a cave in the mortal realm called Scyllin. Ha! A cripple, what does he need wind for? How ridiculous. Does he want to fly or something? Who knows, but I heard that brooch called Feather of Swiftness is beautiful, and wearing it makes one as light as a swallow. Really? But who would bother to catch the wind in such a remote mortal cave for a small, not very useful trinket? It's too boring. This commission, precisely because of its incredibly inexplicable nature, became widely known. But as Hephaestus expected, no powerful deity or renowned hero was willing to travel all the way to a remote cave to chase shadows for such a small, single-purpose brooch. This ghost commission thus hung there, a well-known, unclaimed, somewhat ridiculous curiosity. Hephaestus was not at all surprised by this, he simply waited patiently. He knew that information dissemination took time, and the most cunning hunters often waited until everyone lost interest in the trap before quietly appearing. One evening, as Hephaestus was in his palace, trying to simulate the structure of a forge and furnace in the air with divine power, a light, almost weightless voice, without warning, sounded behind him. Hey, I heard it was you, the cripple who wants to buy wind. Hephaestus's heart suddenly leapt. He whirled around. He saw a boy, looking a few years older than him, about 7 or 8 years old, leaning lazily against the palace doorway. He had curly, fluffy black hair, and a pair of cunning and bright eyes, as if countless mischievous ideas sparkled and danced within them. He was clearly standing there, yet he gave off an elusive, fleeting illusion that he would vanish with the wind the next second. Most importantly, Hephaestus clearly felt a highly resonant divine power fluctuation from him, identical to what was recorded in the Hermes entry in the Codex, deep within his soul. That was the unique authority of boundaries, travelers, commerce, and swiftness. He had arrived. Hephaestus forcefully suppressed his inner excitement and ecstasy, maintaining his calm, even somewhat gloomy expression, and coldly spoke, "It is I. Can you bring what I need?" The boy grinned, his smile carrying a hint of a businessman's shrewdness and absolute confidence in his abilities. He spread his palm, and a rapidly flowing vortex of air, completely invisible to the naked eye but clearly distorting the surrounding air, was swirling and dancing in his palm. That aura was precisely from the deepest part of the Scyllin mountain cave, the oldest and swiftest wind. I've brought the goods. The boy's eyes darted around, accurately bypassing Hephaestus's shoulder and landing on the alluringly glowing feather of swiftness on the workbench nearby. His eyes openly displayed an instinctive greed and longing. Now, shouldn't we discuss my reward? Of course. Hephaestus's face finally showed a knowing, relieved smile. He limped, step by step, slowly walking towards the boy. However, my reward is more than just a small brooch. He stopped in front of the boy, looking at this future divine messenger, the most core and crucial first ally in his grand plan, and clearly stated, word by word. Hermes, how about we make a bigger deal? Hermes's smile faltered slightly. For the first time, a noticeable stiffness flashed in his cunning, lively eyes. Oh. His voice remained light, but the trailing sound carried a hint of barely perceptible caution. How so? Hephaestus looked at Hermes before him, not rushing to hand over the feather of swiftness that served as bait. He simply and calmly stated a fact he had already discerned. The wind, I received it. But your trouble isn't over yet. Hermes's gaze sharpened, and the relaxed, cunning look on his face instantly retracted several degrees. What trouble? Those 50 divine cattle belonging to Apollo aren't going to be easy to digest. Hephaestus limped over to him, raised his head, and stared directly into his eyes with a knowing, all-seeing gaze that was utterly unlike a child's. Not only that, but you slaughtered 2 of them, used their intestines, combined with the shell of that unlucky tortoise you captured halfway, and created an unprecedented 7-stringed lyre. He paused, giving Hermes time to process the information. To confuse onlookers, you made the remaining herd walk backward, returning to the mountains. You even made special straw sandals for yourself to conceal all traces. But Apollo is the god of prophecy. So, your real plan is to use that newly invented lyre to move Apollo, isn't it? With every word Hephaestus spoke, a degree of relaxation vanished from Hermes's face. By the time Hephaestus finished his last sentence, the expression on Hermes's face had completely transformed into a heavy mix of shock, vigilance, and disbelief. These things. He had accomplished these deeds alone, in the most secret corners. It was impossible for any second deity to know, besides himself. Even his mother, Maya, only thought he was playing in the cave. How exactly did this limping craftsman, confined to the peak of Olympus, know every detail? Did he possess prophetic abilities even more terrifying than Apollo's? Hephaestus keenly captured the violent shift in Hermes's emotions, as well as the killing intent that flashed deep within his eyes. He knew the shock was sufficient. Any more, and this naturally suspicious future messenger god would regard him as an uncontrollable threat. He immediately changed the subject, dissolving the potential sense of threat into nothingness, turning it instead into a pure display of value. Don't be nervous, I am not judging you. His tone softened, no longer aggressive, sounding more like an equal partner. I just want to tell you that your plan has one small, yet potentially fatal flaw. Hermes forcefully suppressed the tempest in his heart, staring intently at Hephaestus, waiting for him to continue. Hephaestus raised his head, his gaze passing over Hermes toward the nearby magnificent Temple of Light. Your plan is to use the lyre you invented to appease Apollo's wrath. To exchange an unprecedentedly beautiful piece of music for his forgiveness, and perhaps even the shepherd's staff in his hand that symbolizes ownership of the divine cattle. Hermes did not answer, but his silence was an admission. Theoretically, this is indeed a genius plan. Hephaestus first gave high praise, and then he posed the most crucial question. However, you overlooked the biggest variable. Which is me, who was also recently born. He pointed toward Apollo's temple, his tone flat, yet every word was fooling. Just a few days ago, I exchanged a piece of information from Apollo for an electronic heart. The current Apollo has already experienced sound from the future, sound that does not belong to this era, composed of pure laws. While your seven-stringed lyre is certainly exquisite and a great pioneering achievement in the history of musical instruments, to Apollo, who has heard electronic pulses, it might no longer be stunning enough. These words struck Hermes's mind like a sudden clap of thunder. His pupils abruptly contracted. He instantly grasped the terrifying weight of Hephaestus's words. Apollo was the god of art. His aesthetic sense and appreciation were the highest standard for music. If that standard had been forcibly elevated to a whole new dimension by something called the electronic heart, then the effect of the gift he had meticulously prepared, meant to absolve him and even profit him, would be greatly diminished. It might even fall from being a surprise to a mediocre piece that was nothing special. So, Hephaestus finally revealed his true intentions and extended his genuine olive branch. On his face was the unique, confident, and sincere smile of a potential partner. Instead of letting you take this risk alone, gambling on Apollo's mood, why don't we join forces and upgrade your creation into a truly irreplaceable masterpiece, a priceless treasure that would make even the king of the gods take notice? What do you say? Hermes was, indeed, the born god of commerce and cunning. He needed only a few breaths of time to complete a full assessment of the pros and cons. He realized that this limping new god before him was not a threat, but a top-tier partner who offered a completely new path. He grinned, dropping all traces of wariness and solemnity, and displayed his trademark cunning smile. It sounds like you already have a detailed plan. Tell me, what do I need to do? It's simple. Hephaestus pointed at Hermes's hand, which appeared empty but held hidden mysteries. First, let me see your prototype. Hermes winked cunningly, casually clenching his hand around the wind he held, and the wind dissipated into nothingness. With a flick of his wrist, the seven-stringed lyre, made from a large tortoise shell and cow intestines, brimming with primal beauty and genius creativity, appeared out of thin air in his hand. Hephaestus took the lyre and examined it carefully. He could clearly sense the inspiration and divine power belonging to Hermes contained within it, but through the eyes of a master craftsman, it was still too crude. The idea is excellent, but it's not enough. Hephaestus delivered a precise assessment. First, the tension of the strings is uneven, preventing the vibration frequency from achieving harmonious unity. Second, the curvature of the soundbox cannot perfectly diffuse the sound, leading to excessive energy loss. Hermes listened in stunned silence. These were terms he had never heard, yet he felt they struck right at the core of the problem. My plan is to give it a soul that can resonate at the same frequency as my electronic heart. For the next 2 full days, this lonely palace transformed into the most advanced and baffling music laboratory in the entire mythological world. Hermes, the future messenger god, displayed his astonishing learning ability and creative talent. He could easily grasp the various outlandish, acoustic theories, and resonance principles proposed by Hephaestus, and fiercely debated with him on how to shape these theories using divine power. He even utilized his authority as the god of travelers to retrieve rare materials from places Hephaestus had never heard of, materials that would have been completely unobtainable before. Hephaestus, meanwhile, poured out the last light and heat of the primordial divine fire within him. Using his own electronic heart as a reference, and a piece of the purest, most condensed, wind crystal, provided by Hermes as the core. He forged an extremely complex, star river-like miniature energy circuit inside the tortoise shell body, using stardust, mithril, and several rare metals that Hermes, conveniently, pulled from the depths of the earth. When the last wisp of divine fire merged into the instrument's body and completely extinguished, Hephaestus's body swayed, his face ashen white, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Fugue circuit. Effect. Perfectly amplifies and enhances the physical vibrations of the 7 strings. It can actively draw free-floating energy from the void, which is then converted by the circuit to produce entirely new, non-natural electronic timbres. A brand new, epic-making musical instrument was born. It still retained the beautiful, ancient form of the lyre, but the originally dark brown tortoise shell was now covered in shimmering, iridescent star patterns that seemed to breathe. The 7 strings made from cow intestines also seemed to have been rewoven by moonlight, radiating a soft, holy luminescence. Hermes, standing nearby, was utterly captivated. Hephaestus reached out a trembling hand and gently stroked the masterpiece created by their combined efforts. He named it, the Cosmic Harmony Lyre. The atmosphere in the main temple of Olympus was solemn and dignified, yet undercurrents surged beneath the surface. Apollo, the god of light, stood ramrod straight before Zeus's throne. His incomparably handsome face was now etched with undisguised fury as he righteously accused his newborn brother of his crimes. Father. His voice boomed, echoing through the vast temple, every word seemingly forged in fire. Not only did he steal my 50 divine cattle, but he also used such cunning and shameless methods to cover his tracks. This is a personal insult to me, and an open defiance of the sacred order of Olympus. I request that you pass the most severe judgment upon him. Upon the throne, Zeus's face was as still as water, showing no emotion, and an invisible pressure enveloped the entire hall. However, as his gaze swept over his youngest son, Hermes, who stood below with an innocent expression, as if unaware of anything, a flicker of almost uncontrollable amusement quickly darted across his eyes. He, of course, knew the entire story. This newborn son was incredibly audacious, yet full of clever stratagems, even daring to set his sights on Apollo, who was known for his shrewdness. This disposition, these methods, made him, as a father, very, very satisfied. Olympus did not need sheep who merely followed the rules. But as the king of gods, order and majesty had to be maintained. He cleared his throat, his voice like rolling thunder, instantly silencing all discussions in the hall. Hermes. Return your brother's cattle. This judgment seemed fair, but in reality, it was an understatement, completely omitting any mention of punishment. However, Hermes, standing below, merely bowed slightly, performing an impeccable gesture of respect, but did not immediately obey the king of gods' command. Instead, he unhurriedly took out the brand new, starlight glowing star lyre from his embrace. Before returning the cattle, esteemed father, and my dear brother, please allow me to offer a song for my momentary recklessness, to express my sincerest apologies. With that, before the gods could react, his incredibly nimble fingers gently plucked the strings. Jung. A sound, as if not from this world, but from the deepest star sea beyond the universe, instantly filled the entire temple. That sound was utterly miraculous. It possessed the melodious, elegant classical beauty of a traditional lyre. Yet, it also carried a grand, ethereal, and even somewhat psychedelic, unheard of electronic spatial quality. Each note was like a burning meteor, trailing a brilliant and magnificent tale, precisely cutting through the hearts of every deity present, stirring up ripples. Apollo, who had been furious, had his expression completely frozen the moment the notes began to play. The golden lyre in his arms, symbolizing the highest achievement in music, now emitted a low, uneasy hum. Even more astonishing was this. The electronic heart he had traded from Hephaestus, tucked in his sleeve, now automatically emitted a soft glow. Its pulses resonated perfectly, in a call and response, seamless harmony, with the music of the star lyre. If the electronic heart was a lonely melody from the future, then this star lyre was the most perfect chord, tailor-made for it. Apollo's anger, at this moment, was completely extinguished by this miraculous music. In its place was the uncontrollable desire, obsession, and frantic possessiveness of an artist encountering the highest ideal of their life. He stared intently at the instrument in Hermes's hands. His gaze was 10,000 times more fervent than when he saw his stolen 50 cattle. The song ended, its lingering notes echoing in the hall. The entire temple fell into a deathly silence. All the deities were still immersed in that unprecedented auditory feast, unable to extricate themselves. Hermes smiled, looking at Apollo, who had long lost his composure. My dear brother, I wonder if this small gift I made with my own hands can appease your anger. A gift. Apollo could no longer maintain his pride and demeanor as the god of light. He lunged forward, instantly rushing before Hermes, his voice urgent and hoarse from extreme excitement. What kind of instrument is this? Give it to me. Quickly. Ultimately, this tense confrontation ended with a dramatic exchange that left all the observing deities utterly astonished. Hermes generously bestowed the star lyre, an instrument capable of changing the entire history of music, upon Apollo. This gift would completely solidify the latter's supreme position as the god of music and art, unshakable by any other deity. In exchange, Apollo not only completely dropped the matter of the 50 stolen divine cattle but also publicly declared that they were allowed to become Hermes's legitimate private property. He even solemnly handed over his own golden staff, crafted from gold, entwined with 2 small golden serpents, symbolizing the messenger, shepherd, and authority. Hermes, through a theft that seemingly guaranteed punishment, not only emerged unscathed but also established his core divine role as the god of livestock, in one fell swoop. Moreover, he received the messenger staff for traversing the 3 realms and delivering divine oracles in the future, from Apollo. In this judgment presided over by the king of gods himself, he was undoubtedly the biggest winner. As the gods gradually recovered from their shock and dispersed with complex emotions, Hermes's figure transformed into a stream of light, too fast for the naked eye to catch, and instantly appeared in Hephaestus's lonely palace. He looked at the lame child sitting on the ground, pale from divine power exhaustion. In his eyes, there was no longer any frivolity or cunning. All that remained was deep, heartfelt admiration, and a fervent friendship, like finding a kindred spirit. Hephaestus. He solemnly called out the name. From today onwards, you, Hephaestus, are my, Hermes's, most core and only business partner. No. Hephaestus smiled and shook his head, meeting his fervent gaze, and extended his hand to him. Allies. Hermes paused slightly, then burst into hearty laughter, extending his hand and firmly clapping it against Hephaestus's hand. With a crisp, clear snap, unseen by them, in the deepest part of Hephaestus's soul, the weighty, Olympian code flipped open to the 2nd volume, as if by an unseen wind. On the blank scroll of destiny, a new history was blooming with a golden radiance more brilliant than any before. The excitement of the covenant's formation still pulsed through every nerve ending of Hermes. Hermes toyed with the stepping stone, the feather of swiftness, feeling an unprecedented lightness in his feet, a smile never leaving his face. He looked at Hephaestus, who was leaning against the wall, resting from divine power exhaustion, his eyes full of curiosity. Honestly, Hephaestus, I just can't figure it out. How did you know all my plans? Do you also wield the divine authority of prophecy? Hephaestus merely smiled, offering no reply. The Olympian code was his greatest secret, the very foundation of his existence, and he wouldn't reveal a single detail to anyone or any god until he had absolute certainty. He changed the subject, revealing his next, and most crucial, plan. Hermes, I'm planning to leave Mount Olympus. This decision, for the first time, truly wiped the smile from Hermes's face. Leave. His brows furrowed slightly, his eyes filled with confusion. Why? Although it's desolate here, you are, after all, the son of the queen, a deity acknowledged by the king of gods. And you're Apollo's favorite now, though he doesn't say it, no one would dare look down on you anymore. You are no longer the pawn that can be casually discarded. Of course, I know that. Hephaestus slowly stood up and limped to the palace window. The divine spark within him had dimmed to its extreme, like a flickering candle in the wind, threatening to extinguish at any moment. This time, the lyre of cosmic law had almost completely drained all his accumulated power. Hephaestus gazed down at the pure and flawless sea of clouds below his feet. But this place is a gorgeous cage. He stretched out his hand, pointing to the flawless decorations in the palace, crafted from moonstone, stardust, and gold. Look, there's light here, clouds, eternal purity. But there isn't a single handful of dirt where I can feel the pulse of the earth. Not a single spark of mortal fire to ignite the flames of creation. And certainly not a single rough, unrefined ore, brimming with infinite possibilities. He turned around, his gaze fixed on Hermes. What's the difference between a craftsman who loses his forge, hammer, and mine, and one who is dead? The divine fire within me is dimming day by day. Staying here, my skills will not only fail to improve but will gradually waste away from disuse. By then, I will truly revert to that useless, failed defective product. Hermes fell silent instantly. Although he wasn't a craftsman, he was born with an innate understanding of the core logic of all things. He immediately understood the meaning of Hephaestus's words. A clever woman cannot cook without rice. For a god of craftsmanship, this sacred Mount Olympus, completely isolated from the mortal world, was precisely the most unsuitable place for him to survive. I understand. Hermes's expression grew serious. You need a land of your own, a true workshop that can provide you with power. Exactly. Hephaestus nodded, his gaze seemingly piercing through endless space, landing on that destined volcano in the mortal realm. So, I need you to do me a favor. My friend, my ally, just command me. Hermes patted his chest, the newly acquired golden caduceus in his hand shimmering with reliable light. A knowing smile appeared on Hephaestus's face. Go and submit an application on my behalf to Zeus, the king of gods, to leave Olympus. The reason is to better study forging techniques so that, in the future, I can create more powerful divine artifacts for him and for all of Olympus. Hermes's eyes lit up, and he immediately grasped Hephaestus's intention. This reason was grand and perfectly aligned with King Zeus's pragmatic, rule-consolidating mindset. When Hermes, with a mix of nervousness and excitement at being a nascent divine messenger, conveyed Hephaestus's request to Zeus, the king of gods merely fell into a brief contemplation. His tall figure was shrouded in the shadows of the divine throne, making his expression at that moment unreadable. Allow Hephaestus to leave Olympus. He did indeed harbor the thought of keeping this useful tool under his watchful eye. But the events of the past 2 days had also made him re-evaluate the worth of this tool. Whether it was the electronic heart that sparked a revolution in music, or the lyre of cosmic law that directly helped Hermes seize divine authority. Both proved that his limping son possessed an incredible creativity capable of altering the divine realm's landscape. Confining him to Olympus was certainly safe. But as he himself said, it would stifle his talent, eventually making him just another god. A mediocre craftsman was useless to Zeus. But a master artisan, constantly creating miracles from afar, Zeus's knuckles gently tapped the armrest of his golden throne. In his mind, he saw the figures of the restless Titan giants, imprisoned deep within Tartarus. His rule was not entirely secure. He needed stronger weapons, sturdier armor, to solidify his hard-won kingship. After weighing the pros and cons, Zeus made his decision. Very well. His majestic voice rang out. Tell him I permit him to go to any volcano in the mortal realm and establish his workshop. But you must remind him that every creation of his must be for the glory of Olympus. When I need him, he must unconditionally answer my call. This was a boon, but also an invisible chain. Hermes's heart rejoiced. After respectfully bowing, he transformed into a streak of light, carrying the good news back to Hephaestus's palace. It's done. He agreed. Which volcano do you want to go to? I'll take you there right away. Mount Etna. Hephaestus uttered the name that had echoed countless times in his heart. All right. Hold on tight. Hermes grabbed Hephaestus's arm and activated the divine messenger authority he had just obtained from Apollo. However, he was clearly not yet familiar with how to use this power. Buzz. An unstable flash of light, and the two figures instantly vanished from their spot. The next second, they appeared in the center of the Aegean Sea, less than half a meter from the surface, the cold seawater instantly soaking Hephaestus's robes. Ah, my mistake, my mistake. Hermes laughed awkwardly and activated his divine power again. Buzz. This time, they appeared in a deep forest, where a group of satyrs, half-human, half-goat forest spirits, having a party were startled and scattered, wine bottles crashing to the ground. Hephaestus remained expressionless throughout, allowing Hermes to lead him like a headless chicken, performing random, unstable spatial jumps across various locations in the mortal realm. After several bumpy rides, Hermes finally managed to grasp the knack of flying. A streak of light finally landed precisely at the foot of the majestic and magnificent volcano on the island of Sicily. Mount Etna. In stark contrast to the sanctity and order of Olympus. Here, it was filled with raw, wild, chaotic, yet immense power. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur, and the earth beneath their feet rumbled with a dull roar. Dense smoke billowed from the summit's crater, obscuring the sky. Crimson magma was clearly visible in the crater, like a never-healing, hideous wound on the earth. However, in Hephaestus's eyes, this was not hell. This was heaven. He didn't even need to get close to feel the divine fire within him cheering and leaping, as if a wanderer had found his way home. The endless subterranean fire and magma deep within the earth were continuously replenishing his power through his feet. I'll leave you here. Hermes looked at Hephaestus's comfortable expression, as if he had returned home, and felt happy for him. It will probably be much more boring in Olympus from now on. We will meet again. Hephaestus took out two identical black stone tablets from his embrace. These were items Hephaestus had forged with his last bit of divine power when Hermes moved Apollo with music in the divine king's hall. There were no patterns on the stone tablets, only a simple, mutually responsive energy circuit, looking like two plain pieces of stone. He named them the resonance stones. Take this. He handed one of them to Hermes. When you need me, or I need you, just infuse your thoughts into it. I will hear you. This was their unique way of communication. Hermes solemnly accepted the resonance stone and carefully tucked it close to him. Then, my ally, take care. He transformed into a golden light, soared into the sky, and disappeared into the horizon. Hephaestus stood still for a long time. He took a deep breath of the hot, sulfur-scented air. Then, he turned and took a step with his crippled, yet incredibly resolute foot. Step by step, he walked into that true kingdom that belonged to him. Farewell, Olympus. Hello, Etna. A continuous stream of earth power, mixed with the purest core fire, surged up through his feet and into his nearly dry divine core. His divine flame, originally dim as a bean, visibly brightened and grew vigorous, becoming even more condensed than ever before. This was his promised land. Hephaestus was not in a hurry to find a cave and set up his workshop. He first calmed his mind, and his consciousness once again delved into the Olympian Codex, deep within his soul. He needed to re-evaluate his current situation and calibrate his future course. His thoughts rapidly searched for Hephaestus's destiny trajectory in the Mythology scroll. Destiny trajectory. Hera, in a fit of rage, cast him down from the peak of Mount Olympus, plummeting into the boundless human sea. Fortunately, he was rescued by the sea goddesses Thetis and Eurynome, and lived in seclusion for 9 years in a submarine cave on the island of Lemnos, diligently studying the art of forging. Lemnos Island. Hephaestus's gaze lingered on this place name. According to his original destiny, he should have been thrown into the sea, spending his lonely and oppressive childhood in a submarine cave on Lemnos Island. There, he would learn to forge and, to take revenge on his mother Hera, craft the famous Golden Throne. But now, everything was different. He had, by virtue of his wisdom and skill, remained on Olympus. And through his alliance with Hermes, he had bypassed all the intermediate twists and turns, coming directly to his future divine domain, Mount Etna. He was walking a shortcut no god had ever taken. This also meant that the opportunities that should have occurred on Lemnos Island in the original myth, such as meeting the sea goddesses, had been erased by his own hand. But he had also skipped the 9-year, isolated, development period on Lemnos Island. He had come directly to this true kingdom that would one day belong to him. He was a full 9 years ahead of destiny. But this also meant he had to rely on himself to carve out a new future in this unfamiliar land, full of primitive power. Risks and opportunities coexist. But I have never feared a challenge. However, I should still try to contact the sea goddesses later, otherwise I might miss out on participating in some key events. Hephaestus closed the codex, his eyes filled with unwavering determination. He began to explore the magnificent volcano. He limped along the rugged mountain path, the jagged volcanic rocks digging painfully into his feet, but he relished it. He could feel the surging rivers of magma deep within the mountain. He could smell the unique metallic fragrance of unrefined, precious mineral veins in the air. The further he went, the higher the temperature inside the mountain became, and the dimmer the light. Until he entered a massive, naturally formed volcanic cave. A series of heavy, rhythmic, thunderous banging sounds faintly echoed from deep within the cave. Clang, clang, clang. Each strike made the entire cave tremble, and loose rocks rattled down the walls. Hephaestus's heart skipped a beat. This sound was all too familiar to him. It was the sound of a giant hammer striking a red-hot anvil. He cautiously followed the sound, moving deeper. Turning a massive rocky corner, an incredibly vast space, illuminated red by the Earth's core lava, suddenly appeared before him. And in the center of that space, 3 enormous giants, each comparable to a small mountain, stood shirtless, wielding hammers of unimaginable size, strenuously pounding a red-hot piece of metal. Each of them had only one eye, located in the center of their forehead. That eye glowed with a wild, ancient, yet focused light. Cyclops. Hephaestus's breath hitched slightly. He immediately locked onto their information in the codex. Race: Cyclops, first generation. Names: Brontes, Thunder, Steropus, Lightning, Argus, Shine. Lineage: sons of Uranus, god of the sky, and Gaia, Mother Earth. Description: natural master smiths, they once forged the indestructible thunderbolt scepter for King Zeus, and were key contributors to the Olympian victory in the Titanomachy. However, after the war, due to their immense power, they were feared by Zeus and perpetually exiled to the depths of Mount Etna, tasked with providing thunder for the king of the gods. So that was it. According to myth, his encounter with them should have been much later, personally arranged by Zeus for them to serve as his assistants. But now, because of his arrival, this meeting had been brought forward. As Hephaestus observed them, the 3 working Cyclops almost simultaneously stopped their actions. Their single, massive eyes all turned, in unison, towards the tiny, ant-like Hephaestus. Their gazes were filled with wariness, scrutiny, and a hint of displeasure at being disturbed. A prehistoric, beast-like sense of oppression washed over him. But as Hephaestus approached, the 3 giants felt a sense of suppression in status, as if an ancient master craftsman resided deep within the other's soul. A minor Olympian god. The giants did not become more polite because of this. The Cyclops named Brontes spoke in a booming voice, like 2 massive rocks grinding against each other. This is not a place for pampered folks like you. Get out. Hephaestus, however, remained unusually calm in the face of this blunt expulsion. He did not retreat. Instead, he took a step forward, meeting their scrutinizing gazes. He cleared his throat and spoke in a steady tone, completely at odds with his childlike appearance. Brontes, embodiment of thunder. Steropus, master of lightning. Argus, creator of shine. He accurately called out each giant's name and the authority they represented. For the first time, a subtle change appeared in the eyes of the 3 Cyclops. Their names had long been forgotten by most gods on Olympus. How did this small god before them know? Hephaestus gave them no time for further thought and continued. I also know that you were heroes of the Titanomachy. It was the 3 of you who jointly forged the indestructible thunderbolt in the hands of King Zeus. These words struck the hearts of the 3 giants like a heavy hammer. That was their most glorious and proud achievement in this life. But at the same time, it was their greatest hidden pain. They had rendered unparalleled service to Olympus, only to be met with the king of the gods, suspicion and endless exile. They were trapped in this volcano, day after day, providing weapons to consolidate the rule of the god-king who sat on his cloud throne. They were heroes, but even more so, prisoners. A complex emotion, mixed with pride and resentment, flickered in Bronte's massive single eye. Who exactly are you? What does knowing all this prove? Do you intend to use our past achievements to gain our sympathy? No. Hephaestus shook his head, straightened his small chest, and facing the gaze of the three giants, clearly declared his identity, word by word. I have not come seeking sympathy. I have come to announce my arrival. I am Hephaestus, the nascent god of fire, forging, and craftsman. God of craftsmen. Steropus scoffed, his voice filled with disdain and mockery. A mere babe who hasn't even touched a forge's spark, a born cripple, dares to call himself the god of craftsmen. We three brothers are the greatest craftsmen in this world. Exactly. Argus echoed, forging relies on strength, on experience, on skills honed through 1,000 trials. Not on empty words. They didn't believe it. As the forerunners who forged the thunderbolt, how could they believe that Olympus would give birth to a god naturally destined to preside over their domain? To them, this was an insult to their skill and dignity. In that case, a confident smile appeared on Hephaestus's face. This was exactly the effect he wanted. Words, indeed, cannot prove anything. Then, how about we use the oldest and most direct method among craftsmen to prove my identity? He raised his head, and from his small frame burst a powerful aura that made even the three giants take notice. Let us have a contest. With forging as the theme. A contest. The three Cyclops exchanged glances, and in their single massive eyes, a shared ancient arrogance and competitive spirit, characteristic of master craftsmen, flickered. You're a bold one, little guy. Bronte's rough voice echoed through the cavern, tinged with disdain. But boldness is worthless before the furnace and anvil. That's right, you weren't even born when we three brothers were forging thunder. Stropes chimed in. Hephaestus stood there calmly, as if oblivious to the scorn in their words. He smiled faintly and once again presented an offer they couldn't refuse. To prevent the three seniors from thinking I might play tricks with the topic. The content of this contest will be decided by you. These words were full of absolute confidence, even carrying a hint of subtle provocation. These words completely ignited the fire of pride in the Cyclops' hearts. In their eyes, this was no longer a provocation, but blatant, ignorance is bliss. They were the embodiment of primeval power, the eldest children of Gaia and Uranus. They had forged mythical weapons of the caliber of thunder, capable of shaking the entire cosmic order. What they believed in was grand, capable of destroying heaven and earth, true creation. And this little god from Olympus, with his frail body and nascent divine power, was clearly a decorative figure who could only make trinkets, like vases, wine cups, and jewelry. Asking them to decide the topic was simply courting death. So, Bronte's smile vanished, and his massive single eye gleamed with calculation and cruelty. The challenge he was about to set had to maximize their endless power and experience advantage. At the same time, it also had to maximally expose Hephaestus's fatal weaknesses, his small stature and nascent divine power. Brontes turned and pointed to the deepest part of the enormous volcanic cavern, where there was a profound darkness that even the magma from the Earth's core couldn't illuminate. Since you want a contest, let's have a big one. His voice carried a hint of cruel pleasure. In the deepest part of Mount Etna, there is a forbidden zone that even we three brothers dare not easily tread. There, a 100-headed dragon is suppressed. Though his divine soul is imprisoned, his wrath continuously burns that land and merges with the power of the Earth's core, congealing into a unique crystal. He turned his head, his massive single eye fixed on Hephaestus. We will use that crystal as material. It is filled with the most violent and chaotic energy in the world. We call it Wrath Crystal. The rules of the contest are simple. Each side will take one Wrath Crystal. Whoever can first tame the violent energy within it and forge it into a stable item will be the final victor. After speaking, a cruel, confident smile appeared on the faces of the three giants, as if victory was already in their grasp. This challenge was simply a death trap tailor-made for Hephaestus. The Wrath crystal never tested delicate craftsmanship, but rather the purest, most brutal suppressive force against violent energy. The three of them, as one, possessed divine power as vast as the sea and experience that was boundless. They could even tame primeval lightning, let alone a mere wrath crystal of Typhon. In their view, forcibly suppressing and shaping the crystal's energy with their divine power, as heavy as ancient mountains, was the only viable method. Hephaestus, on the other hand, his meager, newly born divine flame would likely be instantly devoured and corrupted by the older, more violent divine power of Typhon within the wrath crystal upon contact. He might even be consumed by the fire, his divine body bursting from the energy on the spot, leading to the complete annihilation of his divine soul. This was a double crushing in both the quality and quantity of divine power. They wanted to make this arrogant youngster understand what true forging was. Good. However, to their surprise, Hephaestus agreed almost without hesitation. As the three seniors wish. With that, he took the first step. Limping towards the profound darkness, the two sides arrived together at the deepest part of Mount Etna. This place was practically hell on earth. Endless magma, like rivers of blood, surged beneath their feet. The air was filled with suffocating pressure and visible chaotic energy currents belonging to the hundred-headed dragon Typhon. The Cyclops were in their element, and Hephaestus also appeared composed. Soon, they each obtained a fist-sized wrath crystal, dark red all over, with black flames burning on its surface. The contest officially began. HMPH. Brontes struck first, placing the crystal on the massive anvil and bringing down his mountain-like hammer with full force. Clang! Sparks flew. Violent energy erupted from the crystal like a tsunami, attempting to resist. Hold it down. Steropus and Argus immediately stepped forward, extending their hands and furiously injecting their vast, ocean-like divine power into the crystal, like two colossal mountains, forcibly suppressing the raging energy. Their strategy was simple and brutal. To block a raging flood with a massive, indestructible dam. The entire cavern trembled violently from their struggle with the wrath crystal. The three of them were drenched in sweat, veins bulging, exerting all their strength to resist, suppress, and conquer. On the other side, Hephaestus's actions were completely opposite. He did not immediately begin to inject divine power to resist, like the giants. He simply sat cross-legged, suspended the crystal before him, and then slowly closed his eyes. The giants intended to forcibly block a raging flood with a massive dam. What Hephaestus intended to do was to construct the most perfect waterway for this flood, one that could be used for his own purposes. His philosophy has always been guidance is always superior to suppression. His divine sense, like the finest, most sensitive probes, silently permeated the interior of the wrath crystal. In his perceived world, this small crystal was a chaotic universe filled with violent energy storms. Countless streams of energy, like headless flies, crashed into each other, annihilating each other and unleashing destructive power. The divine sense of an ordinary deity would be instantly torn to shreds upon entering. But Hephaestus's divine sense was enveloped in a layer of incredibly pure fire of reason, originating from the essence of the god of craftsmen. He did not touch the energies, but merely acted as a calm observer, rapidly recording, analyzing, and deducing the flow, strength, and seemingly chaotic but actually traceable internal patterns of each energy stream. This was like cracking the world's most complex code. And not far away. Clang! 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 The three giants continued their forging. They took turns wielding their massive hammers, each blow landing with immense force on the crystal. Deafening roars were incessant, sparks flew, and the entire space trembled violently. They were drenched in sweat, their arm muscles bulging, wrestling with the violent energy within the crystal in the most primitive and savage way. Under their hammering, the crystal slowly began to deform, but the energy within it resisted even more fiercely, and dark red cracks continuously spread across the crystal's surface, as if it could completely explode at any moment. Just then, Hephaestus, who had been sitting still, finally opened his eyes. In his mind, a perfect, energy circuit diagram, comparable to the most precise integrated circuits of a future world, had been completed. The next moment, the golden divine fire at his fingertips suddenly became incredibly thin, yet also incredibly condensed. He carefully touched this wisp of divine fire to the surface of the wrath crystal, like the most precise etching pen. He did not try to suppress the energy head-on. He simply followed the blueprint in his mind, meticulously etching perfect channels for energy flow within the crystal, without the slightest error. His movements were quiet, focused, and filled with a creative beauty almost akin to a Tao. When the last stroke fell, that perfect energy circuit was completely formed within the crystal. Buzz. A faint hum sounded. All the violent energies that had been crashing chaotically within the crystal seemed to find an outlet for release in an instant. Hephaestus did not eliminate those violent energies, he simply set new traffic rules for them. The chaotic energies that had been rampaging inside the crystal now began to circulate orderly, gently, and at high speed under the guidance of these circuits. In just a breath's time, all the violent red light of the wrath crystal, which had originally been filled with destructive aura, completely retracted. In its place was a stable, pure, gently yellow glowing energy pulsation, as steady as breathing. Hephaestus slowly spread his palm. The tamed crystal rested quietly in his palm. It was no longer a dangerous bomb. It had become a perfect energy core, a divine power battery, that could be used at any time. He proved that the most skilled craftsman utilizes rules, rather than confronting them. He slowly stood up, looked at the three giants still struggling with their work, drenched in sweat, and calmly spoke. I am finished. Seniors, what about you? Clang. A jarring crash rang out as Brontes' colossal hammer slipped from his vein-roped hand and slammed into the stone floor. The other two giants, Steropus and Argus, froze in place. Three huge single eyes stared, fixed, almost dumbstruck, at the palm-sized sphere resting in Hephaestus's hand, glowing with a steady, gentle yellow light. Then they looked down at the cracked, snarling rage crystal they had been forcibly suppressing, still howling in defiance. The victor was already clear. It was a crushing triumph they could not even comprehend. Impossible. Argus muttered, his lone enormous eye brimming with disbelief. No divine impact, no law suppression, how did you do it? They were the craftsmen who forged thunderbolts, the world's foremost experts on violent energy. They could sense their method wasn't wrong. Given a little more time, they were confident they could fully subdue the rage crystal. Yet that would demand vast effort and an age of toil. Hephaestus, strolling as if in his own garden, had accomplished the impossible feat ahead of them. This wasn't a gap in skill. It was a dimensional descent of philosophy. They could not understand. In their minds, power existed to be met with greater power, subdued, conquered, enslaved. It was the primal law written into their blood. Hephaestus offered no direct answer. He merely cradled the energy core and limped forward until he stood before the three giants. Venerable seniors, you were indeed the first and greatest craftsmen this world has ever known. He paid them sincere, exalted homage. Then his tone shifted, imbued with the luminous wisdom of enlightenment. Tell me, what is the true essence of forging? Is it oppression? Is it twisting matter into new shapes through brute force? Without waiting for their reply, he answered his own question. No. The essence of forging is not oppression, it is guidance. With the wisdom of craftsmen we listen to the voice of the material, understand its nature, and through precise shaping turn a stubborn stone into a masterpiece. Lifting his gaze to meet their stunned, bewildered eyes, Hephaestus revealed the true purpose of the contest. Just like you. Just like us. The trio froze, then sank into deeper reflection. They were sons of Uranus and Gaia, fashioned of sky and earth, primal creative force incarnate. They should have been the freest, most untamed beings alive. Yet what became of them? After the Titanomachy, Zeus, dreading power he could not suppress, exiled them here. Zeus treated them the same way he treated the rage crystal. They were deemed dangerous goods to be guarded, restricted, crushed by force. But the small god of craftsmen before them now said their essence should be guided, not suppressed. In that instant they grasped the profound truth of his words. He spoke not merely of smithing. He expounded a supreme philosophy of existence they had never heard, one that redefined their own worth. This minor deity understood them. He saw the loneliness and pride of craftsmen, the fury and frustration of prisoners. For the first time, genuine respect shone from the giant's lone eyes. Hephaestus. Slowly, solemnly, Brontes for the first time spoke his name as an equal. You are the true god of craftsmen. We acknowledge you. From this day forth, we three brothers shall follow your command. They had submitted utterly. No, not command. Hephaestus shook his head. What he wanted were not cringing servants. He wanted true allies who would fight shoulder to shoulder with him. Venerable seniors, I have a plan. For the first time, he fully unfolded the grand blueprint inside his heart to an outsider. Zeus and every god on Olympus treat us as tools, used when convenient, discarded like worn-out shoes when not. Are you willing to accept such a fate? Those words stabbed like a needle into the most sensitive spot in the three giants' hearts. Unwilling. But what can we do? Argus furiously punched the ground, sending out a thunderous roar. We are prisoners, where could we even go? Who says this place is a prison? Hephaestus spread his arms wide, flames of ambition blazing in his eyes. In my eyes, this is no prison at all. Here lies a kingdom, uncharted and brimming with limitless potential. He painted that grand blueprint in his heart for the three giants to see. The king of gods, Zeus, exiled us here, believing this to be the world's edge, a wasteland of power. He was wrong. This shall become our craftsmen's holy land, a new center of power able to rival Olympus itself. We shall forge Mount Etna into the one and only true kingdom of forging in the entire world. No longer shall we be mere blacksmiths supplying weapons for Olympus. We will monopolize every core technology, define the standards for all divine artifacts, and control the flow of every rare material. From king of gods to lowly nymphs, every deity who wants a fine weapon, a gorgeous ornament, even a sturdy fork, must come here, bearing respect and sufficient price, to beg it from us. Olympus has its temples. And here, we shall build our own, volcanic nation. We shall make every god depend on us, from tools we shall become the makers of the rules. Each sentence from Hephaestus struck the souls of the three giants like a mighty hammer. He had no fear they might betray this revolutionary proclamation. The mythology scrolls records of giants told him their nature and their grievances. Sure enough, the blood long stilled by ages of imprisonment now boiled anew within the three titans. Freedom, dignity, and the supreme glory of a top-tier craftsman who shapes the world. They looked at one another, each giant's single massive eye reflecting the same blazing flame. The next instant, the three primordial titans knelt in unison, lowering heads proud for eons before the small figure before them. God of craftsmen, Hephaestus. Brontes. Steropus. Argus. The three names rang out and merged into one voice. We hereby swear. From this day forth, we take you as our Lord and follow your will. Together we shall build the volcanic nation. As their oath, born from the soul and carrying the might of primordial earth, resounded. Hephaestus felt three streams of pure, ancient, and boundless faith, the unique belief of primeval craftsmen, rush into his divine body. This was recognition from the forerunners, the transference and homage of the craftsman's authority. Boom! Hephaestus felt as though a thunderbolt of creation had struck him. His bones creaked, stretching and remolding at a speed visible to the eye. His childlike frame grew rapidly within mere breaths. When the radiance faded, he was no longer a 6 or 7-year-old child. He had become a sturdy youth of about 15 or 16, bearing a depth and majesty beyond his years. Only his crippled lame leg remained as an eternal mark. His body now exuded a sovereign aura that made mortals dare not look straight at him. He knew that from this moment on, he had truly secured his footing in this mythic world. Within the sanctuary of his soul, the scroll of heavenly mandate within the codex of Olympus once more blazed with golden light, inscribing a new epic. The construction of the volcano kingdom began with an almost fanatical fervor. Brontes, Steropus, and Argus, the three primordial master craftsmen from ancient times, seemed to have a door opened to a new world after accepting Hephaestus's new forging philosophy of guiding rather than suppressing. They transformed their accumulated millennia of resentment and unwillingness into an endless driving force to transform this volcano. Under Hephaestus's planning and guidance, a grand and miraculous, God-level infrastructure project thus began. Brontes, the embodiment of thunder, was responsible for carving out mountains and opening paths. He struck the earth with his giant hammer, not in savage destruction, but following the blueprints drawn by Hephaestus, using the most precise vibration frequencies to re-plan the internal structure of the mountain, opening up countless wide, rational passages and vast spaces, laying the foundation for future workshop areas, storage areas, and living quarters. Sterapus, the master of lightning, demonstrated extraordinary control over energy. He no longer merely unleashed violent lightning, but under Hephaestus's guidance, learned to channel the Earth's magma, making it flow like tamed rivers through the mountain along predetermined channels. These rivers of magma not only provided an inexhaustible source of energy for the entire volcano kingdom, but the light and heat they emitted also made this dark underground kingdom as bright and warm as day. And Argas, the brilliant smith, had the most meticulous mind. He followed the modular concept provided by Hephaestus, categorizing the mined ores and refining them into standardized metal ingots using the most basic smelting techniques, neatly stacked in the newly built warehouses. Hephaestus, on the other hand, was like the chief designer and technical director of this massive construction site. He did not participate much in physical labor, but spent most of his time on more important matters, thinking and learning. Late at night, when the three giants were sound asleep, Hephaestus would go alone to the top of the volcano, and under the starry sky, immerse his mind in the profound, Olympian codex, deep within his soul. He needed to plan a clear and long-lasting course for himself and his nascent kingdom. He carefully read every word on the Mythology scroll, firmly imprinting the major events that had happened, were happening, and would happen in the future, into his mind. The Titan Prometheus created humans from clay and regarded them as his children. He tricked Zeus, leaving the choice cuts of meat for mortals. In retaliation, Zeus refused to give fire to humans. Prometheus hid a spark of fire in a fennel stalk, stole heavenly fire from the heavens, and gave it to humans. To punish humanity, Zeus commanded Hephaestus to create the first woman, Pandora. The gods bestowed various gifts upon her, and Zeus gave her a fatal curiosity and a jar filled with misfortunes. Hephaestus's gaze sharpened slightly. So, I created Pandora with my own hands. This realization brought a subtle feeling of absurdity and destiny to his heart. In the original trajectory of fate, he would become one of Zeus's tools for punishing humanity. Zeus. Hephaestus's knuckles gently tapped the rock. He will never trust anyone, he will only use them. He allows me to develop here now simply because I am temporarily useful to him, providing him with weapons. But this trust could vanish at any moment due to his suspicious nature. He continued to flip through the pages. He saw the rise and fall of countless heroes, Heracles' 12 labors for atonement, Perseus's journey to hunt Medusa with divine aid, Theseus's clever use of a mortal princess's wit to slay the Minotaur. These heroic tales were like magnificent dramas, unfolding in succession in the mortal realm. And behind their successes and failures, without exception, lay the shadow of the Olympian gods' manipulation. I cannot remain aloof. Hephaestus made the judgment instantly. For the volcano kingdom to truly rise, simply closing ourselves off and focusing on technology is not enough. I must participate in these significant historical events, to accumulate prestige, to demonstrate my value, to make all gods and humans in the three realms recognize me, Hephaestus, as not just a lame blacksmith. His gaze finally settled on the most magnificent, far-reaching, and profoundly influential page in the entire mythology scroll. The Trojan War, when gods and men bled together. From the golden apple of Eris, the goddess of discord, to Paris's foolish judgment. From the abduction of Helen to a decade of brutal warfare. There was not the slightest ripple in Hephaestus's eyes. Unlike other deities, he would not choose a side based on personal likes or dislikes. In his eyes, this was not a heroic epic at all, but a decade-long, unprecedented arms feast, driven by the arrogance, jealousy, and selfish desires of the gods. Hera and Athena on the Greek side wanted to destroy a city-state simply because their pride was hurt. Aphrodite and Ares on the Trojan side were purely driven by personal affections and a thirst for bloodshed. And Zeus, high above, swayed back and forth, enjoying the pleasure of manipulating mortal destinies. How ridiculous, yet how true. But it was precisely in this war that Hephaestus saw his own endless opportunities. War meant consumption. Weapons, armor, chariots, shields, these would all become hard currency. And he, along with his volcano kingdom, would become the irreplaceable arms giant in this war. He must get involved. But not as a tool summoned and dismissed by the king of gods, but as an active player in this card game, holding crucial chips. He needed an entry point. An entry point that would allow him to naturally sell his products to both sides, and even influence the course of the war. His gaze quickly scanned the list of heroes in the codex, finally settling on one name, Achilles. Son of the sea goddess Thetis and the mortal hero Peleus, the greatest hero of the Greek allied forces. Hephaestus clearly saw that at some point in the future, Thetis, to protect her son who was destined to die on the battlefield, would personally come to his workshop, tearfully requesting him to forge unparalleled divine armor and a shield for Achilles. So that's how it is. A profound smile curved Hephaestus's lips. He recalled the opportunity he had missed. 9 years of being raised by the sea goddess Thetis at the bottom of the sea, due to changing his destiny. At that time, he considered it fortunate that he had skipped 9 years of oppressive dormancy. But now, it seemed that the gifts of fate were always marked with a price. Missing the opportunity to establish an early relationship with this future, big client, was undoubtedly a loss. However, it was not too late to make amends now. Although he had lost the familial affection of being raised by Thetis, he had gained a more equal and valuable opportunity to actively establish a connection with her. He wanted this great sea goddess to know who her only and most reliable choice would be when she sought refuge for her son in the future. With this thought, Hephaestus no longer hesitated. He took out the resonance stone he had personally crafted, corresponding to Hermes, from his embrace. He infused a wisp of his divine consciousness into it. I need a reason that even a sea goddess cannot refuse to see her. Or rather, a gift she cannot refuse. Hephaestus thought silently, and while waiting for a response, he stood up and looked at the vast, shimmering Mediterranean Sea below the mountain, bathed in moonlight. In his mind, a new, bold forging plan had already begun to brew. My ally. Missing me so soon. Hermes' cunning voice echoed in the resonance stone, as expected. Hephaestus ignored Hermes' teasing and cut straight to the point. I need a few things. Oh, my god of craftsmen, finally placing the first order from Mount Etna. Hermes' voice brimmed with interest. Speak. What is it? Soul crystals from the underworld, or the undying blossoms of the nymphs' garden. As long as the price is right, there's nothing Hermes can't procure. I need something from the ocean depths. Hephaestus' tone was calm, yet the request made even Hermes pause. Hephaestus had already located what he needed inside the codex, guided by an understanding of his own abilities. First, a handful of stillness sand that has slept at the bottom of a 10,000-meter trench, never once touched by sunlight. Hephaestus explained, I require the law of absolute silence within it to build a perfect channel that screens out every clamor of the sea, whether the roar of currents or the shrieks of sea beasts, ensuring absolutely clear communication. Second, a bewitching pearl that has listened to the song of the sirens. I need its mind-bending, voice magic, reverse engineered to capture the user's thoughts and words flawlessly, then convert them into the most lifelike, stable sound and illusion. Finally, a section of ever-flow coral that grows at the world's end, scoured year-round by oceanic currents. That coral itself records the swiftest, oldest paths of the sea. I need it to construct a divine circuit for information, allowing my signal to travel along the ocean's hidden lanes, crossing thousands of leagues in an instant without delay. On the other end, Hermes fell utterly silent. He was no longer listening for a punchline, instead, he analyzed, like a merchant, like a strategist, the terrifying scheme behind Hephaestus' words. What the smith intended was no simple gift. He meant to create an entirely new communications technology, one that could upend an entire divine sphere. Hephaestus. For the first time, Hermes' voice carried absolute gravity. If this plan succeeds, what you'll gain won't be merely the friendship of a sea goddess. You'll earn the eternal enmity of Poseidon, god of the sea. I know. Hephaestus' voice remained unruffled. But wealth and power have always come with risk. Aren't you the one who best understands that, my dear ally? Done. Hermes burst into laughter. You madman. I like it. Wait for my good news. 3 days later, Hermes descended like a golden lightning bolt onto the summit of Mount Etna. He handed Hephaestus a package woven from flowing water, a trace of lingering fear on his face. I got the goods. Honestly, snatching things from those siren lasses is far more dangerous than stealing cattle from Apollo. Hephaestus accepted the materials and could clearly sense the pure, ancient oceanic laws within them. The payment will satisfy you. Without another word, he turned and walked into the heart of the volcano, his main workshop, now taking shape. The three Cyclops were already waiting, their faces bearing the reverent eagerness of students. This time, Hephaestus did not let them lend a hand, instead, he had them observe from the side. He meant to show these newly recruited employees a true creation, one where idea and craft perfectly united, worthy of the god of craftsmen. He used neither furnace nor hammer. He simply sat cross-legged, suspending the three oceanic treasures Hermes had brought before him. The first step in forging is understanding. His voice echoed through the vast workshop, addressing the giants yet also speaking to himself. His divine sense wrapped around each material, not to analyze their energy structure but to listen to the memories and laws they held. The absolute silence, in stillness sand, the voice magic, within the bewitching pearl, the information conduction, of ever-flow coral. Once he fully grasped them all, creation began. In his youthful form, Hephaestus, for the first time in the truest sense, unleashed the core authority of the god of craftsmen. The heart's magma obeyed his will, turning into the purest flame, a docile brush that restructured the materials. Resonance stone technology was woven in flawlessly, becoming the soul. Stillness sand was refined into a shell that could shut out every clamor of the sea. Everflow coral was drawn into filaments, forming the perfect circuit for information transfer. And the charmed pearl was set at the very core, becoming the microphone and camera that would convert divine thought into voice and image. The whole process flowed like water, brimming with the beauty of art and law intertwined. When the last wisp of divine flame died out, two conchs, one large and one small, carved from the most beautiful deep-sea mother of pearl and veiled in dreamlike halos, hung quietly in midair. Hephaestus stretched out his hand and granted the newborn work its one and only authority. Fugue. Tongue of the tides. Function 1. The two holders, no matter where in the oceans they stand, may speak without delay and in absolute privacy, each projecting the other's phantom. Function 2. Main conch only, by spending more divine power, the holder may unilaterally send her voice to any oceanic being she wishes. The recipient need not hold a conch. Amid the tides and surf that creature will hear the distant call, and its own reply will travel back. Go. Hephaestus handed the larger, master conch, possessing the one-way voice, to the dumbstruck Hermes. Present it, from me, Hephaestus, as my gift of first meeting to Her Highness Thetis, goddess of the sea. And tell her this is merely a sample, the whole ocean's information web will be remade because of her. I name the thing, Deep Sea Echo. Thetis, goddess of the sea, was in her crystal palace beneath the Aegean, vexed at how to reach her sisters scattered across the seas. Just then a streak of gold pierced the water, and Hermes stepped into her hall. Good day, brightest pearl of the oceans, your highness Thetis, Hermes said, giving a flawless court bow with his caduceus in hand. After courteous words and introductions, he smiled and offered up the master conch. Hephaestus, god of flame and craftsman, bade me bring you this, deep sea echo. Thetis took the conch and was instantly captivated by its exquisite form and the pure oceanic law within. When Hermes finished describing its powers, her face was painted with disbelief. With tentative faith she let a thread of divine power enter the shell and silently called Hephaestus's name, wishing to confirm with the maker himself. The next instant, a miracle occurred. A clear, steady youth's voice sounded from within the conch. Good day, Princess Thetis. I am Hephaestus, may this humble work bring you a measure of ease. Light and shadow crossed above the shell, projecting a crisp phantom of Hephaestus in his forge on Mount Etna. Thetis was utterly stunned by the marvel. Suppressing her excitement, she tried the second function. Closing her eyes, she spent a portion of divine power and sent a call across the sea to a sister dwelling on the far western shore of the Atlantic. Ianthe, can you hear me? Moments later a faint message, riding the currents, returned to her mind. It was her sister Ianthe's voice, thrilled beyond words. Thetis. Is that you? Heavens. I think I hear your call amid the waves. It had succeeded. It truly had. Clutching the deep sea echo, Thetis was overwhelmed with joy. The artifact had not only solved the riddle of speaking with her sisters. More importantly, that one-way link meant she could become the information hub and heart for all her nymph sisters. The worth of the gift was beyond measure. At the very instant Deep Sea Echo was activated, when the first transoceanic stream and the first one-way call rippled through the sea. In the uttermost depths, within the majestic sea god's temple, Poseidon, king of the sea, suddenly opened his eyes. He distinctly sensed that, an instant ago, an alien stream of information had flashed through his realm. A channel utterly private, impossible for him to trace or eavesdrop upon. To him it was an unprecedented, open affront to his authority. For the first time, his ironclad, information dominion, over the ocean realm had been torn open. A gloomy anger flickered through Poseidon's sea-blue eyes, and the trident in his hand gave a low, sullen hum. Who dares to build, within my kingdom and behind my back, a channel I cannot command? Inside the crystal palace, Thetis held the warm echo of the deep sea in her hand, her inner shock lingering. She looked up at the steady, shadowy figure of Hephaestus, constructed from light and shadow, her azure eyes filled with deep confusion and bewilderment. Your Highness Hephaestus. Her voice, transmitted through the conch, clearly echoed in Hephaestus's ears. This gift, its value has exceeded my imagination. One could even say it's enough to change the way all of us ocean nymphs live. I must know, why would you bestow such a precious artifact upon me, someone you've never met? She didn't believe this was merely a simple, meeting gift. In this world of divine indifference and paramount self-interest, any extraordinary gift must hide an underlying motive. Facing Thetis's question, Hephaestus's shadowy figure merely smiled faintly. He didn't answer directly, instead, he posed an unrelated, philosophical question. Your Highness Thetis, before I answer your question, I'd like to ask you first. Do you believe in fate? Fate. Thetis was completely stunned, she hadn't expected him to ask such a question. The three fates, the Moirai, were beings even Zeus, the king of gods, had to revere. The threads of destiny they wove determined the life, death, glory, and shame of gods and mortals alike. They were the most fundamental, unchangeable ironclad rules of the universe. What was the point of believing or not believing? It simply existed, indifferently, observing everything. I don't know how to answer, Thetis said honestly. Hephaestus seemed to have anticipated her reply. He spoke calmly, in a distant and serene tone, as if narrating someone else's story, painting for her another picture of his destiny that should have unfolded. In another possible story, we wouldn't be having such an equal conversation at this moment. In that story, I was still a newborn, an infant crying for milk. Because of my innate lameness and ugliness, I was deemed a lifelong disgrace by my own mother and mercilessly cast down from the towering peak of Mount Olympus. A flicker of pity and sympathy crossed Thetis's eyes. Hephaestus continued, his voice utterly calm. I fell like a meteor for a day and a night, and finally, with endless despair, I plunged into the cold and unfamiliar vast ocean. For a week, newly born deity, that should have been my burial ground. But, he changed his tone, his deep eyes, through the light and shadow, gazing gently at Thetis. The sea did not show its ruthlessness to me. Only because you were there, your Highness Thetis. It was you and your sister, Eurynome, who discovered me, an abandoned, ugly infant, during your travels. You didn't, like other deities, despise my imperfections or mock my misfortune. You saw only a weak life struggling in the cold seawater, a life worth saving. It was you who warmed my cold heart with the softest embrace. It was you who brought me to the underwater cave on Lemnos, where you secretly raised me. For 9 whole years. In those 9 years, you sheltered me, taught me, and became the only light and warmth in my life. You were the image of a mother in my perception. Hephaestus's voice was soft, yet it carried a power capable of piercing the soul. Thetis was utterly captivated. This story was too outlandish, yet so real that it made her heart pound. And Hephaestus's next words struck her like a bolt of lightning. I still remember, in that underwater cave, whenever night fell, you would hum an ancient lullaby for me. You said that song was sung to you by your mother, the sea nymph Doris, when you were young. That melody, only the daughters of Nereus would know. Thetis's azure eyes widened abruptly. That lullaby. It was the most private memory, belonging only to them, the Nereid sisters. No outsider could possibly know it besides themselves. How did this god of craftsmen, this new god who had never had any interaction with her, possibly know? Hephaestus ignored her shock and calmly delivered his final conclusion. So, now I will answer your initial question. Why did I give you this gift? Because, in that story that should have happened, but which I personally changed, you once gave me 9 years of motherly protection and kindness. Although that story ultimately didn't unfold. Your inherent qualities of kindness, benevolence, and beauty are real and undeniable. Therefore, this echo of the deep sea is not a transaction, nor is it a scheme. It is merely an unworthy child, crossing the long river of destiny, offering a belated, insignificant token of gratitude to you, to the foster mother, who once saved him. He didn't mention anything about the future, about Troy, about her heroic son who was destined to fall. Because it wasn't a transaction. It was simply a pure praise and reward for kindness. A long silence fell over the crystal palace. Thetis held the magic conch in her hand, her heart churning with turbulent waves. She dared not, and could not, fully believe the story Hephaestus had told. It was too incredible. However, the lullaby, known only to her and her sisters, prevented her from simply dismissing it all as a lie. She looked at the calm-faced, sincere-eyed black-haired youth in the light and shadow. She could feel that there was not a trace of deception in his words. That gratitude, transcending void and destiny, was so fervent, so sincere. Finally, Thetis slowly bowed to Hephaestus's shadowy figure with an extremely solemn and equal gesture. Your Highness Hephaestus. Her voice carried a slight tremor, deeply moved. Your story, I have remembered. Your gift, and the sentiment behind it, I have also solemnly accepted. From this day forward, you, Hephaestus, shall be Thetis's, and all the ocean nymphs, most honored friend. Hephaestus's shadowy figure also smiled, nodding in return. He knew. From this moment, the most solid and firm bond between him and this future, major client, this benevolent goddess who held a crucial position in the oceanic world, had been successfully established. The shadowy figure, constructed from light and shadow, slowly dissipated like smoke after Thetis returned the bow. It was also at this moment that Hephaestus truly had the chance, setting aside all schemes and words, to purely appreciate the beauty of this sea goddess with an artisan's aesthetic. It was a beauty entirely different from the majestic grandeur of Queen Hera or the captivating allure of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, a serene and profound beauty unique to the ocean. Her long hair, like the deepest, calmest ocean, was a nearly black ink blue, interspersed with countless silver strands, as if moonlight had penetrated 10,000 meters into the deep sea, scattering shimmering ripples. Her skin, unlike that of mortals, seemed sculpted from the finest, uncarved mud and fat jade, warm, delicate, and radiating a soft, pearl-like luster. But what was most unforgettable were her eyes. They were truly ocean-like eyes. The color of her pupils was the clearest shallow sea under the sun, a translucent blue-green, so pure it contained not a single impurity. When you gazed into them, you felt as if you could see all things being nurtured within, capable of cleansing all sin and defilement. Her beauty was not a weapon, but a sanctuary. It was a benevolence and gentleness from the depths of her soul that could calm the most violent waves and make the ugliest monsters feel ashamed of themselves. Hephaestus, in his heart, once again offered his sincerest respect to the goddess who, in illusory destiny, had saved him, a goddess with such beautiful outward appearance and soul. The turmoil of the deep sea had not yet swept into the depths of Mount Etna. Hephaestus sat upon his lava throne, lightly tapping the armrest with his fingertips. Poseidon's rage was like thunder on the distant horizon. Though it had not yet arrived, it was already predictable. But he was not anxious. Confronting a primordial chief god was absolutely not the work of a single day. It required strength, timing, and, more importantly, enough pieces to overturn the entire board. His most crucial task now was to accumulate power and conserve his strength. He closed his eyes, his consciousness sinking into the code of Olympus deep within his soul. The golden scroll slowly unfurled in his sea of consciousness, and countless streams of information flowed past. His perception skipped past the chaotic period of creation and settled on a great, impending event. The birth of humanity. This was the prelude to Prometheus stealing fire, the beginning of Zeus's punishment, and the first time the Olympian gods formally turned their attention to the land brimming with infinite possibilities. And in this grand drama, he, Hephaestus, played a crucial yet utterly tragic role. The creator of Pandora. The scroll of myths recorded that, in order to punish humanity, Zeus commanded Hephaestus to create the first woman, Pandora. The gods bestowed upon her various gifts, such as beauty and skill, while Zeus gave her a fatal curiosity, and a mysterious jar she was told never to open. A command, again. A trace of coldness flashed in Hephaestus's eyes. They treat me like their most convenient tool again. In the original timeline of fate, he would once again become an extension of the gods, will, personally forging the key that unleashed disaster upon the mortal world. I certainly cannot allow them to manipulate me. He continued reading deeply, attempting to find the key to breaking the situation within the lines of the myth. He saw the record of Prometheus creating humanity. The Titan god Prometheus created humans from clay, viewing them as his children and striving to protect them. Clay and water formed the human body, Hephaestus silently analyzed. But that's not enough. A mere shell is just a lifeless sculpture. What granted them life? His divine sense rapidly searched through the vast ocean of information in the code, and soon he found the answer: Athena. The goddess of wisdom breathed a sacred divine spirit into these nascent clay figures. It was this spirit that granted humanity soul and wisdom, truly bringing them to life. So that's it, Hephaestus realized. Creating life is divided into two steps: shaping the form and imbuing the spirit. Shaping the form is my inherent duty, my domain. But imbuing the spirit, granting a creation a true soul and consciousness, can I do that? He, Hephaestus, was also a powerful Olympian deity. Could he do what Athena did? Could he even do it better? A bold idea began to sprout in his mind. If he had to obey Zeus's command to create Pandora's form, could he define Pandora's spirit himself? Could he inject her with a brand new soul, one personally designed by him and outside of Zeus's control, before the other gods bestowed their deceptive gifts upon her? This idea, like a bolt of lightning, illuminated all the fog ahead. But this was too risky. Creating a soul was a domain even the chief gods dared not easily tread. He needed an experiment, a practice run that was absolutely safe and controllable. He recalled the code's record of another future creation of his. To facilitate his movements, he had once forged several golden maidens with independent consciousness. Let's start with you. Hephaestus opened his eyes, and the confusion was gone. He did not use rare divine materials. Instead, he took a standardized, perfectly pure gold ingot, refined by Argus, from his stores. It was the most basic material, but precisely because of this, it was the most suitable for conducting this pure Genesis experiment. He stretched out his hand, and golden divine fire gently enveloped the gold ingot, melting it into a pool of shimmering, flowing liquid. Shaping the form. Hephaestus whispered softly. Under his will, the golden liquid began to flow and restructure in an incomparably precise and elegant manner. Bones, muscles, skin, hair. He referenced no goddess's appearance but followed the most perfect golden ratio, constructing in his mind a brand new, perfect female form unique to the concept of gold. This process was second nature to him, almost instinctual. A golden body, life-sized, graceful in posture, and holy in appearance, was quickly completed. She stood silently in the center of the workshop, lifelike, yet still inanimate. The real challenge was only just beginning. Imbuing the spirit. Hephaestus mobilized the core fragment of his transmigrated soul, carefully peeling off a barely noticeable shard. That shard contained his understanding of creation, his insight into life, and a unique human imprint belonging to Lian, rather than the god Hephaestus. This was the spark of will. Intense pain struck instantly, as if a piece of his soul had been forcibly ripped away. Golden divine fire, emanating from his fingertip, transformed into a thread finer than hair and almost transparent, slowly piercing the brow of the golden maiden. Hephaestus guided the separated spark of will along the divine fire thread, injecting it with immense difficulty yet perfect precision into the empty core brain of the golden maiden. Hephaestus's face turned pale, and the immense spiritual drain made him feel dizzy. He steadied himself, lifted his head, and looked at his creation. A low hum reverberated. The moment the spark perfectly merged with the golden body, the entire main workshop emitted a faint, profound resonance. Countless divine power encodings instantly completed their self-correction and stabilization, forming a complex and profound consciousness network that far exceeded Hephaestus's expectations. The golden maiden's tightly closed eyes slowly trembled. Then, she opened her eyes. What eyes they were! They were no longer a pure metallic luster, but like the purest amber, reflecting a trace of newborn, innocent curiosity and vitality in their depths. She saw Hephaestus before her, noting his slightly pale face and the look of relieved satisfaction in his eyes. Without receiving any instruction, her body slowly descended from midair, her feet lightly touching the hard obsidian floor without making a sound. She walked toward Hephaestus and knelt on one knee in a gesture that was both incredibly elegant and deeply heartfelt. Father God. Her voice, clear as a wind chimes yet carrying the unique texture of metal, sounded like music from the heavens. It was neither programmed nor encoded. This was her own first definition of her creator. The three Cyclops were utterly petrified. They looked at the scene before them as if witnessing a miracle from the dawn of creation. My lord, you created life. Brontes' voice was trembling. They had forged thunder and tamed flames, but they had never imagined that forging could also create life. Hephaestus reached out and gently helped the golden maiden stand. From today, you shall be called. Hephaestus paused at the crucial moment of naming. He felt this was too important a moment to name her lightly. The maiden across from him tilted her head, her eyes filled with anticipation for her name. Looking at the life he had personally created, Hephaestus decided to give her the same family name as his true self, secretly embedding his longing for his homeland within it. Lihua, you shall be called Lihua. Yes, Father God. Lihua obediently stood up and quietly took her place behind him, like the most loyal shadow, raising no objection to her name. Hephaestus looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with an unprecedented sense of accomplishment. The practice run for Pandora had succeeded. He had not only mastered the method of creating the body, but had also found the key to imbuing the soul. Although the cost was significant, it was entirely worth it. Prometheus. Hephaestus's gaze seemed to pierce the thick volcanic rock, looking toward the distant Caucasus Mountains. Your stage is about to open. And I will show you a script written outside of fate. At the very foundation of the cosmos, at the headwaters of the river of time, lay a dimension that even Zeus, the king of gods, could not glimpse and was compelled to revere. There were no suns, moons, or stars here, no earth, sky, or oceans. Only a boundless, vast tapestry woven from countless faintly glimmering threads. Every single thread represented a life, from birth to final demise, recording all its joys and sorrows, its glories and its humiliations. This was the temple of the three goddesses of fate, the Moirai. The three goddesses, ancient beyond the description of epics, were, as always, performing their eternal and unchanging duties. The youngest sister, Clotho, was the spinner. In her hands, she held a bundle of the purest life essence, born from the primordial chaos. Her fingers deftly spun the material, and new threads of life were born from her grasp. The older sister, Lachesis, was the allotter. Using a ruler condensed from the laws of the stars, she measured the length of every thread of life, determining the fortunes and trajectories of each existence. Her gaze was calm and indifferent, having witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties and the changing of divine pantheons. And the eldest sister, Atropos, was the irrevocable one. In her hand, she held a pair of shears forged from the very concept of the end. When a thread of life reached its end, she would sever it without hesitation. Every action she took represented the conclusion of a life's epic, unchangeable and irreversible. For countless eons, their work had never contained the slightest error. The destiny of the entire universe was under their control, like a grand symphony already composed, with every note precisely placed. Until today. Lachesis, who was measuring countless threads, slightly furrowed her brow for the first time. Her eyes, usually as still as an ancient well, showed a faint ripple. Her fingers delicately picked up a single thread. A golden thread that should have been dull, thin, and filled with the resentment and reluctance of abandonment. Sister, she called softly. Atropos, who had been closing her eyes to perceive the end, slowly opened them. What is it? Look at this thread, Lachesis said, a hint of confusion she hadn't realized was there in her voice. The one belonging to Hephaestus. Atropos's gaze, like that of a dying star, fell upon the thread. In their knowledge, the script of destiny for this thread had long been set. It should have undergone a massive break and turning point shortly after its birth, a fall from Olympus into the deep sea. Its color should have been a dark crimson saturated with hatred, intertwined with the gold of brilliant craftsmanship, eventually forging a throne of vengeance in endless pain and solitude. But now, the thread presented a state entirely outside of their expectations. It had not fallen, instead, it had forcibly twisted its own trajectory right on the loom of Olympus. Even more unbelievably, its golden luster had become purer and more condensed than it was in its original destiny. Within it, there seemed to be wrapped another strand, a deeper, differently colored spark that did not belong to this universe, seemingly originating from beyond chaos itself. What is this? Even the eldest, Atropos, was astonished. There's more. Lachesis' finger traced the strange thread, following the direction in which it extended. They saw that the thread belonging to Hephaestus had recently become tightly entangled with another thread, one full of swiftness and cunning, belonging to Hermes. This entanglement was not an arrangement of fate, but a brand new, self-formed covenant, filled with mutual benefit and friendship. Next, they saw the gentle yet tenacious blue thread belonging to the sea goddess Thetis. Look here, Lachesis pointed to a node. Hephaestus's thread was supposed to become embroiled with Thetis's thread due to salvation, creating a causal link rooted in protection and gratitude. But this entanglement was forcibly bypassed by a powerful will. Yet now, her voice was filled with astonishment. A brand new connection, based on gratitude that transcends destiny, has reconnected in a different, stronger, and purer way. This is practically a secondary creation upon the tapestry of fate. However, these were not what disturbed them the most. It was the ripple effect created by this abnormal thread. Due to Hephaestus's change, Hermes' trajectory of destiny was subtly advanced, allowing him to acquire the herald's staff that was originally meant for him in fate, but earlier than planned. Due to Hephaestus's change, Apollo's destiny now included an unprecedented artistic enlightenment concerning electronic sounds. Due to Hephaestus's change, the threads of the three Cyclops, who were meant to remain dormant deep within the volcanoes for 10,000 years, also began to re-emit an unwilling, fiery glow. This thread was like a stone tossed into a placid lake. The ripples it created were silently altering the pattern of the entire tapestry of fate. This is discord. Atropos, who had remained silent, finally delivered her judgment. Her voice was icy, devoid of all emotion. An unwelcome, jarring discord in the symphony of destiny. She stretched out her hand, and the shears symbolizing the end appeared silently in her palm. She slowly extended them toward the golden thread. According to the rules, any thread that deviated from its predetermined path must be corrected, or severed. However, just as the cold shears were about to touch Hephaestus's thread of fate, Atropos's hand abruptly halted. For the first time, her shears felt hesitation. It was not her own hesitation. Rather, the law of the end itself perceived something from the thread that it could neither comprehend nor accurately measure possibility. The future of this thread was no longer a clear, predictable trajectory. It had become a chaotic, misty, unknown realm filled with countless divergences. The shears could not descend. Because they could not find the single, fated, line of conclusion. Single quote. I cannot cut it. For the first time, Atropos's voice carried an emotion named shock. She withdrew the shears, and the three sisters fell into a silence unprecedented in history. They jointly gazed at the golden thread that shone uniquely among the countless strands of fate, as if they were staring at a newly born monster capable of challenging their authority. After a long moment, Lachesis slowly spoke, her voice distant and profound, as if addressing her sisters, yet also issuing a new decree to the entire universe. If it cannot be severed, then we watch it. Keep your gaze fixed on him, Atropos. This is the first thread in countless eons that none of his sisters can see through. And try to comb these threads back to where they should belong. Thanks for watching.